Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on the 21st of June 2020. And I hope as always that you're all managing to hold on to your sanity. Awfully important that I mentioned that way back when 9/11 happened, I think that very night, and I said the hardest thing would be to hold on to your sanity going through all the changes that would come, because 9/11 was just a kick-off for a good part of the agenda that we're living in today. And I won't even bother going over it all again, except to say that nothing happens by itself, spontaneously. You might get occasional real accident of a plane falling out of the sky or something, but most big things that affect the world are planned for years in advance. That's really how it is. So 9/11, you already had the group that got into power at that time. The group before that, the same group before that, published a list of countries to take out, which mean they would need a Pearl Harbor event, they said in their own writings at the time, which they published. And they said we need a Pearl Harbor event because the public wouldn't get on board with it. And a Pearl Harbor event means if the nation's attacked, then the public are horrified. You play up on, and then you get them all behind whoever you pointed out to be the bad culprit, the Moriarty character. And it played out beautifully according to what they had wanted, and people lost their rights across the world. Isn't it amazing? Across the whole world in lockstep went into the same thing. Oh, you can't have privacy anymore. Nobody can afford privacy anymore. You've got to keep you safe. And out went privacy. And constant monitoring. And they kept telling you little bits to get you used to the idea. And each time you shut your face, that's what they say in Britain, you shut your face, and said nothing, you acquiesced to it legally. You see? Well, the public accepted it. Nobody complained about it, really. And so here you are today with the next phase of it, as I've mentioned before, with the COVID idea. It's a good idea. It's quite good. It's like the character, I think he called himself General Bethlehem. They don't like Christianity much in Hollywood, do they? And that was in the movie that was called The Postman. The Postman, about a future scenario where civilization had fallen apart and was really reduced due to a terrible war or something, or maybe even by a war, who knows. But anyway, the idea is that feudal warlords start, new feudal warlords. And one of them, the big one, is utterly ruthless psychopath and megalomaniac. And he calls himself General, I think, Bethlehem. And he said, because he applied terror to his own men and to the populations, they extorted the goods off of and the food off and everything else that they had. And their abeyance, of course. And he said that terror drives logic out of the public's minds. Nothing changes. You see, he didn't invent the idea for the movie. It was invented for him long before that, because it's always been known. Stalin talked about it too, and Lenin, of course, had a reign of terror, and he referred, in fact, to the French Revolution, same kind of thing before it, where they go to town and start chopping everybody's heads off and celebrating it, in fact. Quite something. Everything can be repeated, remember. Everything can be repeated in society. And maybe that, I hope you're all learning from what's happening today. That literally everything you thought was barbaric and somehow ancient, because we're now civilized, is nonsense, utterly nonsense. And you're living in the same system that Plato said. If you know what worked in the past, and you know the formula to introduce anything, any new meme you might call it today, in society to take off, then find out the formula and introduce it the same way for the same causes and effects and so on. And reasons, of course, the same reasons, step by step. And you can do it all again quite easily. You can. I always think back to the old Dracula movies. And there's zombie movies that copied a lot of it too. But the Dracula era, it was real for the people. You look up places like Bulgaria, and they're still digging up bodies, old bodies in graveyards. They were buried with, it was iron they used actually for putting through the body because certain people they thought were vampires. You know, they were they probably were the modern ultra-international moneylenders, who knows. But the fact is, they made sure they weren't going to come back to life again. And they actually used iron. Iron was thought to have sort of magical property. A very old idea with iron too. But also you find it getting reborn, as I say, in Hollywood and all the different movies, and Count Dracula, and then the zombies, of course, the zombie movies. Folk never figure out that they're being mocked all the time. And quite a few years back, I gave lots of talks on the CIA's involvement with the military-industrial complex with Hollywood. They have a department in our office in Hollywood. You know that, don't you? And they finance a lot of movies. They get not just all straightforward military movies, but also the CIA-type spy movies and that kind of thing. But although they get in the movies, you ever wonder why they can get the cooperation of the Air Force and the Navy and so on? It's all part of it's the guys who's putting out the movies, some of these movies. Because propaganda is wonderful when you get all proud and there's all the orchestra blasting away as your ship goes flying through the seas to destroy some enemy or whatever. And a very simple, primitive, natural thing, actually. Very tribal in a sense, but it works on everybody. But yeah, the Pentagon and CIA is behind that kind of thing. And Britain had its own studios at Pinewoods and for a long time too. I think they bit the dust a long time ago as well. But they did a lot of stuff for World War II as well. During World War I, the government used the military and financing for the military to put out plays for recruitment. There'd be stage plays. And there goes a brave young guy off, and his girlfriend's there, fiancée, and she's so proud of him, and all the emotion and so on. And come back, Jack, etc. Come back to me, alive and well, and all that kind of thing. It's as old as the hills, that idea. It works awfully well, though. We're played like fiddles. And there's never been a time, though, like today, like with such mass propaganda, perfectly put across to the general public with teams. I mean, the universities have been churning out psychologists, neuroscientists, behaviorists especially, who study us in all kinds of situations, and they know exactly how to switch us on and off for different things, you see. Rage, passivity, whatever they want, they can switch on and off. And it's quite fascinating to live through this, isn't it? And to see it happening. Amazing theatre, isn't it? The whole COVID lockdown was like one of these zombie movies. You know, they all get the ones infected become zombies. You don't want to see them; they should be locked in their homes in the dark, sort of thing, and not put out in the street there. And if they're on the street, they should be immediately arrested or whatever. It's so similar. Plus, the U.S. especially, and maybe Canada had involved too. It was an exercise they had. They called it exercise. It was a zombie invasion or something, and it was an exercise I know that they had a few years ago. We never said exactly what it was about, but they did talk about biowarfare and so on to get the idea across. So if you don't get ill in biowarfare, you become an enemy of the people. You see. Oh my God, he's got it. He's an enemy of the people. And that's how they play it out right now. Very simple stuff, isn't it? It doesn't take much to get the people to say, oh my God, I guess look at that. That person's walking down the street and if they've got it, they're spreading it to everybody around them. Even the little birdies are probably getting it. You know, who knows? Maybe the mosquitoes get it when they bite you, like up here in Canada. Or maybe the mosquitoes are giving it to you, yeah? And maybe then you're into the realms of fantasy, they'd say, and conspiracy theory. Really, eh? Did you see all the ones that Bill Gates and the group are releasing in Florida recently? All these different mosquitoes, gene editing and all the rest of it. Well, it will kill off the population of the female eventually by breeding with these infertile males and stuff like that. And this is what they tell you. I remember years ago, too, they ended up with dengue fever in Florida when they released a bunch of stuff years ago. And it comes back every year now. But again, that's a different story. Even though you can verify it, it's not a conspiracy theory. See, you've got to put out conspiracy theories today. If you're not authorized, you know, you're a professor of blah, blah, blah at some university at the moment, with the most up-to-date current topics, at your fingertips, then you're nobody. And the beauty of modern life is you can change reality instantly. If you're one of them at the top, you can. You've got the authority to. You won't hammer you for doing it, for being wrong and then right and then wrong again. No. Anybody who attacks you for being wrong, right, and wrong again, they'll be attacked. You see, because they are nobody. They are nobody saying that about you. So are you surprised you're hearing such amazing things? There's never been a politicized time like we have today, where there's no such thing, or even remotely resembling any kind of democracy. And most of the public don't get that. They really do believe that the riots have had in the States and the protests, because they're two separate things that are mixed together here, and actually a few things above it too, which they don't even know about. It was all planned years ago, this kind of thing. Black Lives Matter had the decency to tell the public some years ago, at least some of the members, that they were basically Marxist. When they say Marxist, they really mean communist, you see. Revolutionary, Marxist revolutionaries, you see. And don't forget, in communism and Marxism and revolutionary, you always got to stir up emotional hype wherever you see it, and get people on board with you. So get all the disaffected groups, even create disaffected groups that weren't really groups before, make them, and then graft them onto your movement. And then obviously your army is much bigger than it was before. And you find that a few years ago, one of the leaders was Patrice Cullors, a self-described mission to build local power to intervene in violence inflicted on black communities and so on. But she started off as, she says that we affirm the lives of black, queer and trans folk, disabled folks, undocumented folks with records, women, and all black lives along the gender spectrum. We make space for transgender brothers and sisters to participate and lead. We're self-reflexive and do the work required to dismantle cisgender privilege and uplift black trans folk, especially black trans women. You understand, a lot of these groups never existed before. And I do remember, I told you people before, I met a Marxist, a communist organizer from Moscow, but he was English, from England, who went back and forth to Moscow for the latest stuff, and he came to Canada with impunity. Nobody stopped him in customs and all that. And he went around the communist cells and gave them the updates. And he said back in the 80s that they would bring all the different groups on board, all the sexual variant groups, put it that way. And they would build their numbers, and then when one group went out to protest something, they'd all come with them. They had Muslim communists with them too at that time, I remember that. And at the time you'd actually see them in Toronto, for instance, the same groups and the same people from different groups protesting, regardless of what the cause was at the time. It was always the same groups, and that's how you do it in these particular movements. But they're well funded today, mind you, by the people at the very top, because the people at the top have planned the future of the world, and everything else is just a way to get us to it. It's not meant to be logical or make common sense or anything else. It's meant to suit those at the top. I mentioned before that the World Economic Forum is a good place to start. It wasn't the first part of their movement, but the guys that run it I'm talking about. But these are the richest folk on the planet. And it's good for me to see people actually following it. I've been talking about it for years. Whatever happens in the world is done because those at the top permit it. Not just permit it, but actually organize and pay for it to happen. It suits their purposes. And the people who shift trillions and billions around the world every day in the stock markets, etc., sometimes 3 times or more times a day, it's all done for them by the biggest money managers on the planet. That's who runs the world. And believe you me, if it suited them to go into some even pre-promiscuity society, if it really suited them, they'd make it happen. And they'd bring forth all these new people that would be youngsters, you see, who would testify to the joys of celibacy, etc., like millions of them. And they give you young ones, just always pick young ones. They coach young leaders and pay them awfully well and put them forth. They're really like little actors and actresses. Some of them were disaffected, mind you, and got chips in their shoulder, but those chips are well fed by the money boys at the top, Johnny chocolate chip cookies. And they use them, and they get paid awfully well. Believe you me, you'll see little Greta, for instance. She'll be probably a multi-millionaire before she's 20, because she'll be made to be, you see. And you forget that these people in their own websites, the W.E.F, one of the big things is creating future leaders. They pick them young, and the Club of Rome does the same thing. All the big foundations do it. You've heard about the Common Purpose group in Britain. That was part of their job too, was to pick youngsters and train them to be future leaders for all political parties, so they'd all really be the one party. And they've been doing it for years and years and years. And then you have the schools, of course, getting incredible indoctrination systems set up for the children. Well, very perfected, really perfected systems. Not much of a chance of escaping. And that's how it's really run. And back then, I realised that those at the top ran all sides. Obviously, you got to get change, the plan changed to control the world and guide billions of folk along the same path, thinking it's just evolving by itself. And most folk do. They really do think that everything just evolves by itself, you know. Bill Gates just came out with a system, which of course is a bit of a nonsense fairy tale, how it happened, but you go along with it. The whole world goes along with it. And they're all front people, as I've mentioned before. They're all front people, obviously. And all the big names that you hear are front people. And there's much bigger organizations behind them. And say the ones at the top don't work. They suggest things once in a while, and everybody else must make it happen. That's just how it's done. They don't have to fill in, including removing people. They never say remove so-and-so, they're a nuisance. They say, you know, so-and-so's been a bit of a problem. And things just happen. That's how the world's always been run. A few years ago, there were so many scientists involved in different labs and biowarfare type stuff disappearing and having accidents. 1 year, about 5 or 6 of them all died, falling over stairs and things, and over banisters and down stairwells. And it's a terrible time for them. They're just so clumsy all of a sudden. And these things really do happen, folks. They really, you know, it's like watching that movie, The Island, the one with Ewan McGregor, where rich people, ultra-rich folk, which isn't far removed from the truth, by the way, because they had the stories out back in the 80s that it would soon be possible to clone whole human bodies. And then, oh, that'd be terrible. You would have artificial people, or, you know, new types of people. And so, oh, don't worry about it. It would be for body parts. We wouldn't let them get to consciousness and so on. Well, that's really what the movie The Island was based on. And the richest folk on the planet had their DNA taken, little samples, and whole bodies, perfect bodies, were grown for them. Only they were awake, and they were kept to be children, almost childlike mentalities, by very simplistic training and so on from you might call it birth. But they could grow them very quickly, about 3 years or so, into adulthood, which actually follows what the disclosed, that's where the movie all came from, disclosed scientific articles that were profuse a few years ago. How they could simply turn off the aging cell, the time thing, or speed it up if they wanted to. I can remember reading the articles at the time on the air. And all the stuff in the movie they could pretty well do. And we know that China has had one of their proponents out talking about it and getting a lot of heat for it, but he said that he had done it already years ago. So he won't be the only one. No country, since all countries really, the way that you're presented to you, are pretty well fictitious in this modern age. There's no country that wouldn't do the same thing, you see, at the same time. And they do share the secrets up at the top. But in the movie, as I say, they kept them almost infantile. I feel like a mini world of infantile people who literally were kept on a very physical healthy regime of diet and so on, and exercise, so that they were in prime condition, so that when the people they'd been cloned for, the richest folk, needed their organs, or any organ, they could then harvest it, as they call it. And they told the people on the island, of course, the clones, that it was a lotto. You get a lotto, and when your when your number came up, you went off to the big island sort of thing, not knowing, no, that's the end of your life, because they're taking you in for a kidney or whatever it happens to be. And it's well done, because really it was referring to the whole system we're living in today. We're raised to be naive and dumb pretty well. We're raised on fiction, which is mainly fiction, on television or whatever you're watching all the time. It's fiction, 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 completely loaded with politically correct updates for whatever week you're living in at the moment. And people adopt these points of view for themselves, and you'll hear them parroting verbatim the indoctrination that they've had recently, word for word almost. And they take the opinions they're given as well and everything without any deep thought on anything at all. So yeah, we are the island in a sense. And in Ireland too, they mentioned that they could make the people live another 40 years or 50 years with life extension, basically, using these techniques. And that's true, they can do that today, by the way. And they can make them live longer with the right medications and transplants, etc. I remember watching, I think it was one of the top scientists in Israel at the time, giving a general talk. I mentioned this before. And he casually mentioned it. It was casual, and it was amazing with the audience. We're still all talking to each other as though they'd just come in the door or something. And this professor or whatever, he said that if you got an extra $7 million, he says, we can help you live to 140 if you want. And that's really how it's done at the very, very top, and that's a fact. But that was even strange enough in the movie, about the same amount of time, years as well. 140 or so. So you're living through fact is fiction and fiction is fact. And of course, even the movies get you used to the idea, the trial balloons. And a lot of folk who watch movies will say, I wouldn't mind getting that myself if I'd do this. You've probably heard people say the same things, haven't you, throughout your life, maybe. And you might be one of the people who are all for these things. You might say, well, if I had the money, I'd do it too. And you'd also see top. I've heard folks stand up for top politicians or crooks who got caught with their hands in the cookie jar, big time. And they say, well, I'd do the same myself if I was. And it give me a little start once in a while to realise that a lot of people think the same way. Corruption is a human thing, obviously. We're the tendency to be corrupt, but today it's so prevalent with a completely, how can we say, a changed immoral society. All the old ideas of moralities have been thrown out the window. In fact, morality holds you back. You're not a winner if you've got certain morals, you see. And that's all part of your games that you see on television, where folks strip off and do stupid things to compete with each other, and the folk that manage it all are looking at them and shaking their heads and laughing and making money off them. It's quite amazing. But anyway, that's what we're living through. So at least with Black Lives Matter, they admit once in a while that they're basically Marxist and for world communism, world without borders, all that kind of stuff. And it doesn't come out from them at all how we're going to finance all of this stuff, except a vague idea of everybody will share properly, and you'll have your commissars that'll make sure you get your proper quota of food or ration or whatever. I guess that's how they I don't think they think too far, really. But at least this one, as I say, she was in Black Lives Matter. She's one of the bosses there, and one of the founders, at least. Patrice Cullors, you'll see her up now. We were talking about her talk a few years ago, where she said that she and another one there too were organizers, Marxist organizers. They said that now if they're Marxist organizers, they know how to set up the agenda to stir up trouble amongst people, to exacerbate and amplify any existing trouble, and then they jump and use all the different crowds that get involved for their own purposes. That's a standard communist trick, but at least she admitted it. And And that's what you're looking at today. So believe you me, if the ones at the top, the people at the World Economic Forum, the thousands and thousands of ultra rich families that attend it and decide what the future is going to be, what money is going to be in the future, what kind of lifestyle you're going to have in the future, very new future coming up too, by the way. It's the one that they published some years ago, been prattling on about austerity, population reduction, and who can breed and who cannot breed. There'll be for a little while a period where they'll give little brownie points, little gold stars, for being goody good, and you might, if you serve the Marxist type system of austerity, you might be given the right to breed at least one child. You see, that'd be your reward. They actually had articles out quite some years ago about that, where bureaucrats and people who work for the system and make it all happen would get the right to have at least one kind of copy, you might say, of a child of you. Never said anything about married, or that's out the window, of course, but you get to at least have an offspring, and your progeny will go down through the future being good Marxists for each generation, serving the ultra-rich who will not follow Marxism because they're all making sure that you'll follow it with austerity. It all came up. You understand, we're living through nothing that wasn't planned a long time ago. There's no spontaneous anything. In Antifa, they said they look for spikes in emotional troubles and any violence or whatever it happens to be, and they jump on the bandwagon, use the folk who are grieving and use the crowds, foment the mass demonstrations, direct it and use it for their own cause. That's why General Franco really won in Spain in the so-called Civil War. It was really an overthrow by the communists. That's what they were trying to do. And if you read the articles in some of the books by George Orwell, who was in the wars at the time in Spain, he said that, like most folk, he'd been really brought into this idea of Marxism in a socialistic sense. He thought like most folk, the lie, and they use people. But he was taught in university this is the thing of the future, and to be more just society would come into being, etc. And he did definitely, like many of the people at the time, witness the massive poverty from the Great Depression. It continued right up until World War II. And parts of Europe, Britain was awfully hard hit, and they had miners' strikes and so on. Not strikes, but marches all the way down to London. To peaceful again, really peaceful. They weren't burning and destroying stores and so on, and looting. They were really peaceful. But there were big marches, thousands of people going down to hand in petitions to Parliament. That's how it was done. And it was a horrible time for people. He saw the working class and how bad it was. And he himself was not working class, but he at least, I guess, felt their pain to an extent, as Bill Clinton would say. And he went off to Spain, thinking he could change it there too, you see, and the standard stuff, overthrow the church and overthrow the system and blah, blah, blah. Until he got there, and he saw them burning churches, raping and killing the nuns horribly too. It wasn't just executions. It was, they really want to make people, they really have so much hate in them, whoever targeted group at the time. They have so much hate, they want folk to really, really suffer horribly. And that's what he saw. That really happened all through Spain and other countries too, mind you. And eventually, because he wasn't communist or Marxist enough, you see, and because they list everybody in communism, everything's record-keeping that you wouldn't believe. And he was on a list for extermination himself, because they said he could be an enemy because he's not Marxist enough or communist enough. And he knows enough about it, so he might be a good speaker and be able to, so he could be a problem down the road that would take people away from the big movement. And so they had him slated. That's why he got out of Spain eventually. But Castro himself was brought in because of the chaos that was happening. You had all these different groups that all, again, were going to riot for a better tomorrow. And you had different kinds of groups too. You had syndicalists that would take over factories or even farms and so on. And people would join it. Even farmers would join it, thinking, yeah, let's all share and alike and share alike and do the work. And then we will sell our produce to this other factory and this, so, or trade it, the goods for easy. So everything would get traded around by producers, and each real, and then there was real communism as opposed to centralized communism. That was the idea of the syndicalists, basically, and those who were a form of anarchism against the standard system. But they always ended up in chaos, and the communists turned on them and started killing them too. So Franco dealt with it in Spain. Otherwise, there'd be nothing left to Spain, but that's utterly chaotic and a mess, you see. In Spain, the communists did what they always do, which was to say, where's part of you for people's rights and equality and all that? And so they use everyone else, like a big mob, to fight their battles for them as they join in too, naturally. But they sit, they don't take over completely in the beginning. They take note of everyone, all the other competitive parties that are on the go, and use them, because you need numbers. And once they think they're starting to win, they turn on everyone that's helped them, you see, and kill them. That's what they do. They always do this. So whatever is the cause is what they jump on top of and say, yeah, we really believe in this, so terribly much, and we want to be part of it all. And they'll have the same slogans, they'll chant the same slogans as everybody else, because it's awfully important. You'll start to think you're one, and then of course once they think they're winning, they turn on everyone that's helped. In fact, they turn on the majority that's even done all the work and take over. That's what the Bolsheviks did. You forget that too. Same thing over and over again, the present time. It's part of their manual. So it's quite amazing to live, or to study these things, and then watch all happening again. And yet, when you realize the evidence is overwhelming, it all comes from the top, as I mentioned before. Plato mentions it too. Nothing would happen from the grassroots and be allowed unless the elite wanted it to be so. And that's the truth of it. That really is the truth of it. Those who think they're fighting a terrible system and are really foolish enough or immature enough to believe that they're somehow winning are lost souls. They really are lost souls, because there's nothing that isn't managed from the very, very top, and huge think tanks on behalf of those who already run the world. Really. It was the ones at the top in the W.E.F. and all the CEOs of the massive corporations. Why do you think all the top oil producers, the big corporations, are all on board with sustainability and the reduction of what you're going to get and all the rest of it, or be able to buy or fuel-wise, all that kind of stuff, austerity? They're all on board with it. They were the first ones that would be on board with it. I should give you a little clue, but it doesn't for most folk, really, especially the young folk. They always think they're on a roll. We're on a roll, It's our time now, and we're running the world. Yeah, and everybody's terrified of us, because they're being allowed to create a bit of terror at the moment. And there's nothing. I've never seen it so blatant as it is today. It's just astonishing. And then it didn't happen by itself. So we're so politicized on behalf of our masters to accept things. That even high crime that happened long before this, even with the thousands of young females that were getting picked up in Britain and put on drugs, heavy-duty addictive drugs, then used for prostitution by incoming groups. And that's all. It was all in the papers. There's nothing racist about it. It's facts, folk. And literally, it took, for years, the establishment tried to cover up, because everybody in the establishment knows that you can't touch this with a 10-foot pole if you want to keep your job and get promotion in the police or civil service or local council. And they all turned their back on thousands of poor young females. You got to understand what's going on here. We're so politically correct. We couldn't save ourselves if our lives depended on it, and that might happen yet, by the way. It's all intentional. The ones at the top live in their own little, what's that movie where they had their own kind of island in space somewhere? And if you really serve them well, you might get to visit it once in a while. That's pretty well the idea that they're on about. It's really astonishing to live through it all again, as I say, and you're watching it happen. And the youngsters literally think they're on a road, that they're making some difference here. It's their world, it's their future. Huh? It was the same, as I say, with the sexual revolution, promoted from the very top. And you had the rock music revolution too, the revolution, you see, the British invasion, they called it too, for America. The highest authorities in the world that financed the whole system and entertainment, created it, made it happen. The big machinery made it happen. And if it didn't suit those at the top, it would never have happened, obviously. I've said before, if you look at Freemasonry, like the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, you look at the Communist Manifesto, most of the stuff is interchangeable. Don't forget Albert Pike wrote copiously about the system, and he had Mazzini, the revolutionary. He trained them to be a revolutionary, a world revolutionary, and say that turned into world communism eventually, the Communist Party. So it goes on and on and on. And Albert Pike didn't start it all. It was on the go before he joined. And you can find traces of it even in Rosicrucianism, in France in the 1600s. But the idea was revolution, revolution, revolution. And London, the city of London, financed all this kind of stuff too. And they set out, people trained Freemasons into other countries across Europe, the Catholic countries especially, to bring them down and create their own cells, just like the communists later. The communists didn't come out of nowhere. Look at Trotsky's books, for instance. I'll give you a clue. He worshipped Freemasonry and praised it to the high heavens. And but yeah, you would understand. Freemasonry was no doubt about it. Was a revolutionary movement, massively so. And the reason I had all the passwords and signs and all the rest of it, little secrets as they call it, was because they had to lie to the general populace who didn't belong to their groups. The fact that their whole system was to take down society to rebuild it, you see. That's the idea, and you remake it and remake it. So communism and the Marx's Planck's the manifesto end the family unit, right? But at the same time as free love, of course, the end of the family unit. And they're guys, as I say, who like founders of the left wing, who were awfully rich, who worked for the richest folk on the planet. Like H.G. Wells, who was promoting free love again about the same time as Marx was kicking off. And they're all connected, all these different people, with the same ideas. The only problem is, at the time, was what do you do with unwanted offspring? Well, they didn't want a heavy population. It's quite fascinating to go into really understanding what was happening back in the 1800s. Because folk really misperceive what goes on, according to the ridiculous books that they churn out today for them. It's terrible, the capitalist system is all horrible. And it was damned horrible. But it's the same folk running it today, folks. They give you little revolutions and promote little people, little revolutionaries like Greta and so on, and use them all. But you've got to understand that nothing has really changed. H.G. Wells literally foresaw a time when they could literally dispose of children. This great H.G. Wells, the great writer of science fiction, and he wrote a lot of non-fiction as well. He was quite open about it. He and many others too, by the way. And the eugenics societies, that are still on the go, by the way, and even some of the heroes in eugenics. You've heard about some of them, but Galton Darwin and all the rest of them. But do you know that they're still on the go today? And really tied right in with the left wing, tied right in with it completely, with its elimination of the family unit and elimination of private property for most folk, not for the ones at the top, of course, etc., etc. It is really the reduction of the population, the wrong kinds of... H.G. Wells and others mentioned it too. It wasn't just They're going to help the working class people. In fact, H.G. Wells hated the working class people. It was there's too many of them. That's how the left wing was going to sort out, getting rid of the abundance of labour, but by whatever means possible to reduce their population and numbers. That was it, folks. That was it. It's astonishing. Folk never quite catch on, which is exactly what the top eugenicists wanted, and they were all part of the same club. I've even heard about people like Nikola Tesla. They go on and on about Nikola. Oh, the man was a genius. So take this genius status, and who makes folk into the stars that you follow? That's why they call them stars. You follow them and you adopt their opinions. Because they're geniuses and you're not, you see. So I'll adopt that opinion. And so his opinion becomes my opinion. And that's why they give you it. If you follow the stars. Again, it's Freemasonic in a sense. You see the 5-point star. But, and same with even Hollywood. They never had stars before that. You had well-known people of the stage. But it wasn't a great profession. It was really kind of a lowly profession and kind of suspect at times too. But they made them into stars when Hollywood took over, and of course that really more than quadrupled their budgets and the income, etc. But then they use them because people start to follow them as they follow the characters they portray, without really knowing the people themselves. And then they use those people in the Council on Foreign Relations, like Clooney and so on, and Angelina Jolie and others too that they've picked. And the folks, I know them. Yeah, they're famous and awfully rich. So I'll follow what they say. Why would you follow someone who portrays fictional characters? Huh? They don't even know who they are themselves half the time. That's how actors and actresses really are. They're always attention seeking. But they're all used. Everybody gets used for the following. Same with communism, as I say. And communism or anti-fair, any flavour that you want must always agitate when they see a spike in violence or a spike in anything or emotions are getting going. They jump on the bandwagon and then they end up leading it and then they end up domineering it and then they take it off in a different direction, which was their purpose in the first place. That's how it always works, folks. It really does. It's a well-oiled machine. It's been tried and tested over and over again, and it's all written in as that as woman said. She said, trained Marxist organisers. They know this. They know what to do, and they actually say in their manuals they wait for the emotional occurrences to happen, the spikes in violence, or whatever it happens to be, and jump on the bandwagon. And they'll distort any truths anyway. It doesn't matter what's facts and what isn't anymore. And before you know it, they've turned martyrs out of people too. And by the same token, the ones at the very top can make anybody a martyr. I hope you understand that. It's not the first time that you. What do you think? And I really mean this. I used to think about Remembrance Day and so on. And in Britain they have their version of it too. It's always a cold time that they have it in Britain. And they're all standing there with their muffled coats on and believing they all fought for something that was good. Even though many of them, they were dying off from World War II and were questioning what they fought in the first place according to what happened to Britain. Really, come on. And because obviously those in charge of Britain had a completely different future plan than the folk who fought it to preserve it ever dreamed of. But you also get the different cenotaph. They go and put their wreaths there and so on, and their poppies and yada yada. But you also have in every country they got the unknown soldier. It's a kind of afterthought, you see. Because a lot of folk were blown to bits and there wasn't a bit of them left. Or they were so destroyed by massive shelling, etc., or just rotting, unfortunately, in the battlefields, World War I especially. And II had a good share of it as well, that whole scenario. But anyway, so that they would get this idea. It could be an empty coffin for all we know, but they make a big move. But this is Joe Average, whoever this Joe Average was, and they make a big deal of fighting for their country and that kind of thing. It's sad that they can make almost, and again, it's apotheosis. You make godhoods out of people Many gods, they rise and they become gods, just like the old emperors of Rome did, Even Constantine, yes, he adopted the Christian idea at the time, but because it was still newish, and he was, indoctrinated into the Roman system, he also built his own little area for his own statue as a god. You see, he would become a god as well, which is quite a good ambition, I suppose. If you don't have many things to look forward to, at least you can become a god, I suppose. And that's how things are. You're watching it happening today in modern times as well. Really. I always think of that old song, Heroes and Villains, They give you your heroes, they make them into heroes, and then they give you some good people to turn them into villains. It's back and forth like that. That's how easy it is to manage our thoughts and our minds by propaganda. We had quite a few years, I mentioned it before, it's so important to remember, never forget, where folk had turned and tuned out of the regular media. They were so sick of getting no news at all. With the death, basically, of active travelling journalists, you see, and the politicisation of everything. Everything had been so PC since the Leveson Inquiry in Britain. They came out with new statutes for journalists, and they did the same thing done in Australia and elsewhere. Until all they could do, they were so scared of having lawsuits against them eventually, or getting fired. All they can do is politically correct stuff until they're propaganda, really blatant propaganda arms for those, on behalf of those who own them, basically. Really sad, isn't it? But folk had tuned out, and they have it so badly that even with their very short, small discounts to buy a subscription to their news, most folk weren't doing. They're so sick of it. Why bother when most of it's going to be regular handouts anyway by the free ones, the same stories, and also folk were sick of celebrities. That's all you had for this. Celebrities are not news. It's made up fakery. I mean, totally. It's a star machine again. It's total fakery. It truly is. There's nothing more fake than show business. That's what it lives on. It's a show. It's not real. It's a show. But folk buy into it. And who cares about what so-and-so has done? And the women that they put on the newspapers and so on, they're hardly anything on. They don't walk around or say anything. They just flaunt things. That's how the word flaunting comes in. What they're flaunting, That's news, is it? Is that news? But folk tuned out. They're so sick of it. And they made hay immediately with the COVID idea. Oh my God, terror, terror, terror. And I've gone through the stories. I won't go back over them, except to say that they were given permission when to get unleashed on the general public by those at the very top, the World Health Organization, and again, the World Economic Forum. They were told to terrify the public, including literally with the behaviourists and psychologists brought on board in Britain. They admitted it. That they were given, and the papers admitted that they were given handouts where the journalists were told to write things in such a way that they might have to really increase the tension or fear amongst the public to get them to comply. This is warfare, folks, and it hasn't stopped. And they're on it, but they're on a roll now. Suddenly, folk are tuning in every day to find the news in case you miss that little bit of information that might save your life, like a horror movie. That's what I say. And you'll watch horror movies to the end because you get involved in it. You project yourself into the roles, and if you turn away, you might miss that one thing, and you get eaten by the dinosaur. You see, that's what happens. Same idea. It's very simple, but yeah, tune in tomorrow, and we'll update you with the latest breaking news on COVID. Should you take this or should you not take this? And they'll give you about 10 different versions of the same thing. Oh my God, you don't know what to do. And the whole country and the whole world gets locked down pretty well, right? Pretty well. Except some African nations ignored it completely, and they seem to be fine. And the testing stuff, it was a joke. It still is a joke. Fake positives, fake negatives. Just toss a coin in the air. If you really want to go that route, just toss a coin. And now, of course, that maybe the riot, the looting and the protesting as well, these are different groups, again, often mixed together, is kind of dying down a little bit and losing readership and news. Then they're right back to COVID again, did immediately. But COVID is such a political virus, it can switch itself off. Because no one's arresting anybody that goes off to protest, and including all the ones who are forcing it upon the people, all the different governors of different states and some leaders of countries. They were out protesting as well, shoulder to shoulder. When you see such rubbish getting pushed to why are you following anything that they tell you? Why do you follow anything that they're telling you? Remember, I said this from the beginning. Fauci and others, from the very beginning, because it was pre-planned, done. It was not spontaneous. And folk do have short memories. They really do, right? But don't forget, it was planned years before, reiterated at least 1 year before it all broke out again, this so-called pandemic. They changed the rules for pandemics too, for even classifying it by throwing any figures to make it a pandemic out the window. Didn't need it anymore. Just a statement of it is enough. Because it was planned that way. Because this is the big push. This is the revolution they're going through on behalf of those who own the planet. Not these little kids in the streets. They're swagging around thinking, yeah, we're now in charge. It's the folk who own the planet. The folk who buy and sell the grain of every country and flog it across the world instantly, back and forth, and can withhold it from a nation, say, oh, they've been bad, and let's make them suffer. These are the folk who that all your money goes to, no matter what you're spending it on. They own it. They own your governments. They're all on the payrolls. They all get big donations, like thousands and thousands. And every politician, when they retire from politics on their meager salary, is a multi-millionaire. It's just a coincidence. So everything is a show in modern life. Everything is a show. Years ago, I gave the talks on prepared speeches. Every leader of anything, even the police forces, have prepared speeches. They have public relations spokespeople. When you hear that, you're listening to propaganda. That's what it means, public relations. You see? Otherwise, you could ask anybody in the police force what they think about it. Oh, I can't tell you. You have to go to the public relations officer. And they'll spin it for you. Well, and so you walk away with this kind of half-baked, wishy-washy statement. You can't wait to figure it out. You're not meant to figure it out. That's how it's done. So you're living through a huge agenda. This is it, folks. This isn't a preparation for what's to come. This is the complete push for the whole new World Economic Forum's new society, as we want to call it, into austerity. I gave all the talks years ago at cuttingthroughthematrix.com website, remember? And I went through it all in detail, and real good detail and depth from the sources themselves, and what they were going to bring in, and what they wanted, etc., the kind of society they would build. And they would use everything sustainability, folks. Maurice Strong, sustainability, who was picked up by the Rockefellers as a youngster, supposedly groomed for his position in helping rule the world. And they put him in charge of oil fields to show him the business, how it works. The same thing as George Bush was given. He was taken off to Kuwait, where his daddy had helped to set up the oil fields there years ago, and the family businesses, etc. And little Georgie was given charge for a little while to find out how it was all run. That's what they do. Say, well, we'll put you in charge of a few oil fields and so on, and let you know how the world really works, and all that kind of stuff, And then they meet the people who decide the prices, what the value of the currencies at the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund and the Bank for International Settlements. Oh, it's a big club, and it's a fact. It is a big club, and I mean it. It's a club. It was set up by the Royal Institute for International Affairs, a private organisation, from the CFR group type. And before that, they were a covert group that went around the world, grabbing all the resources of the world under Lord Alfred Milner. And they put their own people in charge of countries as lieutenant governor generals, etc. The same power as the king or the queen. But yeah, they grabbed all the resources. The empire for them was grabbing resources for themselves and the private corporations at the top. Nothing to do with going across. Let's bring civilization to the poor people here, there, and everywhere. That was just propaganda for the general population who would be given the price, the tab for the cost of it all. And that's how things really work. Nothing has changed. Everything has to be made palatable through public relations or propaganda for the public to swallow, And that's why they went to war with the Boer War, so that ones in the city of London could grab the diamonds and the gold supplies of South Africa. And that's a fact, Nothing's changed. It really hasn't changed. So they set up their own, let's create a world government embryo. So they set up a League of Nations that became the United Nations, and they still run that behind the scenes. Let's set up a World Bank, private, we'll own it. Let's set up the International Monetary Fund, which is like the collection agency for the loans that have been given out. And they'll also manage the governments that fail to pay back the interest and so on. And so we'll send officers in who then manage the country by slashing all the social programs. That's how the IMF operates. And then they have the Bank for International Settlements, the big one. This is going to be made more and more prominent, especially now. This is the time for it. It was always set up to eventually be the final arbiter of all currencies, and they'll decide where you live or die as a nation by devaluing your currency according to their standard, or increasing it if you're very goody, and they plan to live in your country for a little while. That's how it works, and most folk never figure it out. But the British Empire was a private corporation system. Yes, it was. And I'll tell you, there's nothing different from my point of view from that and the attempt at Russian or Soviet communism system. That's all corporation. Everything's a corporation, folks. Running the same thing. There's a group at the top that run it all, who benefit from it all. As they tell you that you're all equal, or like Britain, you're fighting for a good cause to bring civilization to the world. What's the difference as they fill their pockets at the top? There's no difference. Marx was right in one thing. He did say that all wealth comes from labor. All. Making things, producing something. All wealth is based on the products, etc. But the things that they didn't mention, that those at the very top would end up getting all the profits of your labor, etc. We won't call it that. We'll redefine the meaning of that. You see that you can't make a profit off labor. So we'll redefine it. And they did. There's no end to ingenuity of corruption in the crooked class. There honestly isn't. And sure enough, they get, what do you think the university degrees are that do with public relations? It's to teach folk to be better liars and to use things like statistics to convince and lie to the public or to get gain from some whatever it is they're after. Did you know that 5% agree with this, or 95% agree with it? Yeah. It's all chronology. And that is the real degree, is chronology, you see. A good con man or woman is really worth their weight in gold, at least gold, maybe even platinum, to those at the very top. They employ the best ones at the top. They have amazing minds that sit there and, so-and-so, our God so-and-so, whoever the character is above them on a higher level, wants this to happen. It's up to us to make it so. And they sit there in the scheme. But how would the public accept it? Well, the public won't know it. We'll convince them it's really something else. Call it. They have whole programs, especially the changing of names, that really confuse you until you can't figure it out. And when you can't figure it out, you just give up. And then it sort of sails ahead. That's how everything is really run today. It's quite fascinating, really. It is fascinating. It's like years ago, even in the times of Shakespeare, I mean, who introduced thousands of new words into the lexicon, basically, the English language. And you have to say to yourself, what was the reason for it all, etc.? Well, one was, standardizing a language, because England, like Scotland, had many different dialects, until some dialects you'd hardly understand the folk next door to them, because folk didn't travel much. They're bringing us into the same system, mind you, with the lack of mobility. That's part of the World Economic Forum's plan for opening up society after COVID, or even during COVID. They don't want COVID to ever go away, you understand? In fact, it's not going to go away. According to them, it's not real to start with, so it doesn't matter. With that kind of fantasy, you can make it stretch forever. And they've even said, too, but they're going to bring the contact tracers were planned before COVID broke out. How they would do it with apps, etc., on phones was already planned before it broke out. The folk who would get the contracts was already planned before it broke out. I'm not surmising here, I've gone through it all before. And you're living through a plan, you see. It was planned before it all supposedly broke out. And they don't plan on just unlocking it. They said at the start, little Foxy Fauci, who has his fingers in a lot of pies, but believe him, he's just too compromised to be believable. And he said, life will never be the same again. Exactly what was said when 9/11 happened. Life will never be the same again. That's a very important statement. It's like Bill Cooper at one time he mentioned, because in revolutions with the Freemasonic type that happened in France, in the translations, they always give code words and little phrases out before they start it for all members to pick up on, you see. And one of them, I think, was, now is the hour of the times. Now is the hour of the times. And that's how you launch things. World War II was similar. When they gave code words out to the French resistance by the BBC radio from London. And they'll give out different ones every night for different groups that would be fighting against occupation. So really, this is standard stuff. But you go back even, into history, and you'll find there were movements started in the 1700s, 1800s, of people who were dissecting the meaning of a lot of new words and so on, because there were such obvious cons by those in the so-called secret societies. Now, don't go into, it's conspiracy theory. It's a fact that names for them, and for the actual particular theory in itself, because Pike himself said it, we never speak so plainly as Masons when in company amongst non-Masons, is what he's referring to. It's just that the non-Masons can't pick up the meaning that they're giving out to their own brothers, you see. That's how things really are. And there's color coding ones as well, and there's numbers and numerology, because that goes into Kabbalah as well, And it goes way back into ancient times with the numbers. The whole idea of numbers as a language, you see, awfully important. The Chaldeans that were used by the Romans in their war in the Middle East. I'm getting distracted. In the Middle East, they actually hired Chaldeans and Jews who would, because they had alphabets were numbers. Every letter has a number. And they'd mark them on sticks as couriers, and they would send them off as runners to your other regiments and so on, or centurion groups. And they have another Chaldean that would read it on their end and translate it for them. Basic cryptology. Yeah. Fascinating in a sense. But again, what I'm saying is the whole system is cryptology. What you're taught is regarding the system you're living in is cryptology. It's nothing to do with what you're being taught at all. It's not real like that. It's not real like that. I've said back in the 90s, I said, other folk have picked up on it too recently, again, that they'll say that if voting worked for the general public, it would be made illegal. It would get banned. The reason it's not banned is because it doesn't work for you. It doesn't. And the folk who get in are pre-picked anyway, according to Carol Quigley, regardless of the party that they're involved in. The leaders and the few folk around the leaders are all pre-picked because they belong to the same one organisation. It doesn't matter whether they're left-wing or right-wing. And I must admit it, I mean, I've got one of the books, I've got a few books from the meetings, the international meetings they'd have when the Rockefeller Foundation paid for the meetings across different countries, for their annual meetings, for what became known to the general public eventually as the Royal Institute for International Affairs and Council on Foreign Relations Group. Before that, they had covert names. And again, often this went under, as a round table society, you see. But Rockefeller would pay for them. I've got quite a few of their books. And in the 1930s, they went through the whole scenario, even into the future beyond now, in fact, to the rise of China and how China would eventually become, after America failed, and America would eventually fail, by the way, that's what they said. Because they use every people until you're bankrupt and they've wrung every bit of cash out you like a sponge and leave you a massive debt, and they move on to the next one. So China would be set up as a big superpower eventually. And that was unthinkable back in the 30s. My God, no, China could never become a superpower. They didn't have the technology, they didn't have the training, university systems and so on. No, we made it all for them eventually for them and built them up. And your own governments, because they were told to, supplied education for them. And then we gave all the factories to China. They didn't steal it. China didn't steal anything at all. It was all given to them on behalf of those who rule your countries. You've got to stop thinking that you're living in a country where folk really care about you. I don't care who you are. You've got to stop it. You've got to really stop that. Look around you. Look at what's turned into the countries they thought were your countries. You know, look at them. Until you come right into what marks a borderless world, right? And what Marx wanted was exactly what the Royal Institute for International Affairs wanted. Just coincidence, eh? The richest folk on the planet that ran an empire wanted the same thing. It must just be a coincidence, eh? Huh? They never figure it out, do they? They never ever figure it out. I remember saying years ago that Vietnam, why on earth was the US sent off to Vietnam? Think about it, folks. I mean, you had the communists inside America at the time in the universities already teaching Marxism and communism. Think about that. Think about it. Why would you go after another country that you can't even really identify with at the time and fight it there? It was different reasons altogether. And part of it was to also break the system in the US itself, obviously. But it's another way to look at things, you see. Like the elite, this is how they always do it amongst their own. They bring them in that are going to work for them, and they'll say, look at it from this point of view. And it's always a way that by nature you would ever have, well, generally not have stumbled on yourself. But they'll say to you, how is Vietnam today? Well, back then, there was dozens and dozens of small tribes, all vying with each other for power. That had been for centuries in that area, in that region. And the North Vietnam tried over history. They were historically true and accurate for keeping their histories, but the northern one often, there's a different name they gave it, and would often try to be an empire builder down through history, you see. So if you want to do what is it the World Bank wants? What is it the communists want? What does those who run the world finances want? The same thing. Centralize the government and bring it into, then you can really manage it and organize it and rule it as you wish, you see, and guide it along this, and then give it the same education system, the same everything, until folk all just obey and do what they're told as one people. Well, how do you do that? How do you bring an enemy in? If it's just themselves fighting each other forever, It's not going to work. It's just a continuation of what happened down through history amongst some different tribes fighting. So you bring in an enemy which they can't identify with from the West in, and they go at it. And suddenly, for the first time, all sides can say, wait a minute, what are these foreign devils doing? And they unite eventually against them. Perfect. Isn't that great strategy? Huh? Except for all the poor suckers that were sent over thinking they're fighting for some decent thing against this terrible communism. Eh? So they end up leaving basically a united Vietnam with centralized government and the great indoctrinations. China loves them too now, because now they're basically a subsidiary of China to a good extent. And it's much easier to get whole nations if you stop getting out the tribal mode, fighting each other, and sectarian mode, fighting each other religious wise or otherwise, until they all and do what they're told by a centralized. Then it's easy. Then just add it to the whole collection for the world, until you have a collectivized, centralized authority for the whole planet. That's what it's about, and that's why the W.E.F, who own all the resources and all the financial systems and everything else, and they own your governments. That's what they have. That's what they want, folks. And they own the communist, what you would think is the Communist Party of today, the neo-communists. They own it all, and it suits them at the top. It's an old plan. Old plan. Absolutely. There's a saying that every dog has his day, you know. Because dogs, but you see the idea of even the cartoons they used to have. A dog would want to think, I'm a big dog, even as a tiny one. I'm really big, and I'll be a boss one day. And everybody gets their chance, you see. And everybody gets used. Everybody gets used. It's quite something. Old techniques, old Machiavellian techniques that are now on steroids with the technologies and abilities to manipulate the public opinion and minds pretty well instantly overnight on a mass scale worldwide at the same time. That's power, isn't it? That is power. Quite something. I can remember, as an example, when going to high school, and it was the first week or something at high school, and there were some young students, may have been student helpers or something, or temporary students, but I know one or two of them came in, these young fellas, and they're having a chat in the classroom. And at that time, of course, they thought they were going through a revolution, and a left-wing revolution for whatever it was. For all the good causes, you know, the left wing they always give you good causes, and it's always for a better tomorrow and a utopia and fairness and stuff like that. And you had all the examples of it eventually. Once the Soviet Union supposedly fell, they didn't fall; they just moved on. That's what Gorbachev said too to the Politburo in his speech. He said, "We're moving it out into the world now, to the next phase." With the cooperation of the West, of course it was, the ones who ruled the West. Anyway, these teachers were there, and they're saying, yeah, it's our time now. And just like you see the Antifa, it's our time now, they were saying to themselves. And they were, of course, they had gone through college and teacher training, and they come out as good little communists. And they talked about how they were using the power of music then too. And one of them said, you know, his favourite was Dusty Springfield. And... oh yeah, and then they had a little debate and argument about who's the better type, Dusty Springfield and the Springfield group at the time, I think that, or Sandy Shaw, you know, and they get kind of hostile towards each other. It's the instantly formed group. So I'm all for Sandy Shaw, and no, Dusty Springfield's got a better voice. And yaddy, they literally thought that in this day of Bob Dylan, you know, and revolution, you know. The time is the era changing idea. They literally thought they were part of it and it was theirs. They really did think that. I knew better. I was all younger than them. I knew better. I says, come on here. Don't they know? Don't they know that these are all picked people to help change society on behalf? I knew it then. It was obvious to me. The BBC at the time, only ever recruited the people on television and who worked in the higher level jobs for television too, not even necessarily on camera. They were all from Eton at one time. That's how rigorous it was. The same places that would appeal for their intelligence services for MI5 and 6. Because you control people's minds through whatever propaganda you're going to give and whatever entertainment you're going to give them. So here's your British government's system, the government system, giving you top of the pops and things like that, with the infamous Jimmy Savile, where groups that were suddenly famous with the big famous making machine, you see, the big machine that makes you famous, who went on with no leads in their guitars or anything at the time. You wouldn't even have time to set up, honestly, if you had the real gear there. And they'd mime, but the teeny boppers didn't know. And it was all for the sexual revolution as well. So you have sexual, don't forget the words, revolution was used. Sexual revolution. What do you think that is? Did you see people in the streets say, we demand to have sex? No, you didn't have that. Folk had always had sex. It just depends on the context that you had it, and what you did with any offspring about it. That's what it was about too. But someone else at the very, very top was promoting a new system. Sex, drug, and rock and roll, eh? Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And that's what they give you. And actually, you aren't going to think too straight if you're on drugs. And you won't make good decisions in any possible way. And it was well put out there and tested upon the public, and it worked awfully well. It did work awfully well. But it was amazing to hear the people thinking they're part of some revolutionary movement, Yeah, it's our music, like the Who talking about my generation, yeah. It was all put out by show business on behalf of those who ruled to make youngsters think they were part of something and that it was their movement. Oh, it's our time now, Quite something, right? Quite something. But most folk never catch on. As say, Plato said it. He said it. Everything that's in society was so rigorously managed and detailed and recorded in society, even in ancient Greece. He said that even anything to do with music or plays as well, and that plays mandated that you had travelling troubadours and plays that would go around the different Athenian provinces and islands and get performances and get paid by the state to do it, because this is before Christianity, a lot of it, remember, and when Christianity had its early passion plays, like religious plays, Rome had other plays that were doing with emotions and systems and all the rest of it. And they were mandated, they had to be performed, and everybody had to attend to watch it, because plays, just like movies today, really, really affect society. Oh my, did you see so-and-so? What do you think of that then? And your emotions get played with like crazy if it's a good play or a good movie. And you come away with opinions that the creators wanted you to have. And Plato knew this, and he says everything has to be authorized from the top, including youngsters at that time putting up music back then. He says, because music can either create revolutions. This is thousands of years ago, over 1,000 years ago, over 2,000 years ago. What I'm saying, and that's what he said. And he said, we have to keep a tab on them all, like what, an eye on them. He says, and literally license them, because they can help foment revolutions. And that's how strictly guided the whole thing was, and monitored and managed, you see. There's nothing we're doing today that we didn't know back then, except today it's much more perfected. And the studies upon the human mind and how you'll behave and react are so well predictably managed, actually, by those who put the stuff out for you. And the instant feedback they get on everything to see if something's working on your minds. Probably so many thousands emitted today that they would probably go this way too or do that. It's very predictable and very accurate, because folk don't think for themselves. Even when street theatre, I'm talking about massive street theatre, is being managed in front of your eyes. So yeah, you had sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and then you have that what came out of it was, well, how can you deal with all these unwanted pregnancies? Well, then you have those, let's start financing that until literally you have no responsibility for anything left. The state will take care of everything, you know. So whatever you do is, and then the state will come back on you. Well, you got to pay for all this now. You all do this, and so we're going to pay for it all. You've all had to pay for it all, including those who are not even taking part in it. I mean, so that's how it works. Everybody gets used. It's quite astonishing to live through it and watch it happening, and then listen to the reasons that people who've been used give you. They parrot their indoctrination. It's just astonishing. Really astonishing. But it's all theatre. When Gorbachev, right, the head of the Soviet Union, was launched with a remake, a total makeover for the West, who did they get to parade Gorbachev around as a new Soviet, a trendy Soviet, Before, and it's true, before they used to have dull clothing. Again, it wasn't proper communism to have bright colours and things. You're serious and drab and all that, and that's how it was portrayed. And so here you have Gorbachev with custom, really well-made suits, made to measure, tailor-made, and blue and other ones, too, very good materials, and reeking of wealth. It was a trendy communist. And his wife too was introduced. Who did he tour around the West? Whose arm was it? Margaret Thatcher, the supposed right-wing capitalist, takes him around the world and brings him to Britain, and they pre-planned it. They pre-planned, and so this was admitted to eventually, that the media would have access to little interviews with Gorbachev and his wife, as long as they didn't ask him any personal or political questions. And so you found from his wife, for instance, people in Moscow can walk in off the street into a place to have a facelift if they wanted. It was wow, isn't that wonderful, eh? Yep. Things like that. And but yeah, Maggie Thatcher, the right winger, brought him into the world, and she toured over to the States and met Reagan, and they're all pals together. The new Soviet system, you see. And you think it's all different, it's all like loggerheads with each. Who's kidding who? Who's kidding who? The people who and the families that are at the World Economic Forum are the ones who made and still make the money of all kinds of wars, real and cold wars, hot wars and cold wars. They make the money off it all. And they made fortunes out of the Cold War. We need new missiles. The Soviets have got one that's 5 miles faster than our one, etc., etc. Great business it was. But we're all used. We're all darn well used, all of us. If you've had your basic indoctrination at school, you've already been used. You've come out like Oh Lucky Man, that kind of satirical movie they did in Britain, believing, the world's really good and proper, I'll work hard and I'll get ahead and all the rest of it. No, look at it today. The top capitalists are saying, we've got to have quotas of people. And you might be in the bottom heap here because here's a new normal just come in, and here's the new recent rules for it, etc., etc. It's already happened, actually. So don't ever believe that you understand it all unless you've really studied it and went into it in big and great. Whatever you do, don't follow anything. Whatever you do, you'll get used. I gave talks years ago on all the stings that were set up by government agencies and intelligence, catching young guys, stings for terrorism. Guys who literally, they might have chewed the fat, as they say, on what they like to do in a kind of infantile way, but it was all talk, until the agencies come along, set them up with the means to do it, although it were often fake stuff. and then guide them on what to do. Then they grab them and arrest them. This is what most of these things are. And young guys who probably would never have thought of in their lifetimes themselves in reality, and certainly would have done anything, arrested, and then they're used as number one. You know, our agencies have caught so many of these terrorists this year, and every country's doing it. Every country. I remember one of the heads of one of the top intelligence agencies in Britain came out and said this. He says, this isn't good. This isn't just entrapment. It's fomenting the problem, creating it. And of course it was. It's meant to be. The whole world's a stage already, isn't it? And believe you me, unless you're on the big act at the top there, you're not even a player. Huh? You're not even a player. And it's sad. It's so sad that everybody gets used and abused. And if you ever learn too much, getting used, when you're getting used, you better be careful, because if you know too much, they might come after you about their internal workings, and you've actually worked for them, fomenting trouble or revolution, for a better tomorrow. You can't have it today, but you get better tomorrow. And the whole world's destined, because it's planned this way, to go into a massive financial depression. Not for those at the top. They simply rebalance it all, and the costs of and the values of everything. The reset, as they like to call it, the World Economic Forum. And they lose nothing, believe you me. But everybody else is going to go into real forced austerity. Yep. And then it'll be for the good of the planet. And they'll give you the commissars, all these often young women actually, it seems to be the favourite ones these days, who'll be the ones who'll dictate to you how much you can eat that week, how much lettuce you can get, and what a bad crop this year, so more Brussels sprouts for you, eh? I'm not kidding you here. Yeah, it's comical, but it's the truth. It's the truth, eh? And you wait and see it. You wait and see it too. How they ran the Soviet system was they killed off all the little farmers. You might, I don't know if they still have clips out there, but they used to have little documentaries of the Soviets going after farmers who in the early days didn't want to give up their farms for the collective system, you see. Because after all, maybe they and you're talking about little houses, very little houses, the ones they have in Scotland, like single-story houses. And there'd be a farmer holed up there because he wasn't going to give up his farm that his dad and grandfather had helped build, so they could have their half-dozen cows or whatever, and a field or two. So here they are, the Soviets were going to take it all off them for the greater good. And these people literally would have a standoff with them. And the Soviets would go ahead and bomb them out, put the grenades in and kill them anyway. But once they'd done a lot of that, they started they go into a starvation. The Soviets were selling off grain from the Ukraine. Stalin was, Well, they were starving the Ukraine. They're starving the rest of the country too, but the Ukraine big time. But the Ukraine was a breadbasket for the Soviet Union for a long time, even before the Soviets took over. That's part of the reason they took over. And then they took the means of production off them, including all their plows and everything away from them, and took all their food off them, including their seed for next year, and starved them to death. Millions of them. But they say it's well over 6 million. And you'll see that you can still see clips of video. If folk who can't stomach looking at reality of the past are dangerous. They're dangerous because they'll help foment the same thing coming again. And I'm quite serious about it. Because those at the top always use the same techniques over and over and over. Like a pendulum, as they call it. That's what they say in Masonry too. I said, well, life's like a pendulum. Like it happens all by itself. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. It's made to happen that way, on behalf of those who own it all. So you have you had basically a country that was going to starvation at the time in the Soviet Union. And then it's replanting en masse lots of potatoes, the standard stuff, potatoes. And they started to get what they called a beetle, they called it the Colorado beetle. It's a potato beetle. And it must have been the US that put it there, right? Immediately started that stuff. Well, you only see it with your brave new world here, when you're all forced to eat nothing but the modified vegetables. The usual famous name is on and so on. And then they'll have the same thing happen. Oh my, we didn't realise there was a new beetle just broke out here and you're all going to starve this week, I'm afraid. Yada, yada, yada. You see all the same stuff again as you get trained into utter austerity. It's for the good of the planet too. Look at the bright side. If you're not eating that much, you see, then nature's going to start recovering better from man's interference of what is done in the past and be more sustainable then, because a lot of you'll die off of starvation. There you go. Look on the bright side. Well, it's for a better tomorrow. And this is the kind of stuff you get taught over and over and over again by those who really rule the world. And yes, the world is really, really ruled. Do you think for an instant that those who own all the property and own the think tanks and own your governments and send them off to war and grab resources, do you think they're worried at all about Black Lives Matter or Antifa? Do you really think they're sitting terrified about it? No, folks. They're financing it. Now, before I prattle anymore, I should remind you to go into cuttingthroughthematrix.com. And if you throw a few bucks my way, hopefully, you'll see how to do it on the website. You can use checks or send cash or use PayPal. And hopefully I'll be getting more new systems in shortly, hopefully. Because we're not going to get locked down. We're going to get locked down right through winter time into next year. That's just where they're going. And those, again, the same folk who rule the world. Now they've switched COVID back on it. What's a COVID again? You're all going to die. But all they're doing is sticking to the same agenda that Fauci mentioned at the very beginning. They always tell you the things at the very beginning. Life's never going to be the same again, and this is going to continue into the following year. And we won't let you out or anything until you get a vaccination. Our vaccination, you see. And I certainly wouldn't call it it's a normal vaccination. It isn't. Anyway, go into cuttingthroughthematrix.com and you can donate to me. You can also buy the books and discs at cuttingthroughthematrix.com. And things are starting to move, maybe temporarily until they do the next lockdown. And let's be honest, we can really move fast now and get things shipped out and so on. So for the folks that are waiting, just have the patience. Canada, remember, is well on board with this thing. Canada's pretty well a communist country already, you might say. Definitely all completely new world order idea. And it's on board with the whole World Economic Forum agendas for complete austerity and the abolition of cars as Agenda 21 to our private vehicles and so on. Abolishment. On board with it all. I'll touch on them tonight maybe if I can get around to it. But you can buy the books at this at cuttingthroughthematrix.com. And as I say, all my official sites are listed on that com site. Make a note of them in case any of them go down, and hopefully you can keep getting my shows. Remember too, other folk put my shows up, but my originals, go into the cuttingthroughthematrix.com website if you want the originals, and you can sometimes get them a bit earlier than folk if they copy it and put them up. So it's up to you. But regardless, as I say, the future's written. It really is written. And you people maybe start to find out that most of the decisions along the way, they never had any say in it at all. You really haven't had any say in anything at all. And let's be honest, look at the nonsense you've had to fight and accept, either fight for or against or accept over the years. It isn't just gender related. Even right down to bathrooms, for goodness. This is what you were given to fill your heads with and have folk arguing about it. Well, I think we should have all kinds of bathrooms. But here you are. The whole thing was to lead up to a bigger army. Like they say, the nihilists and the atheists that would get recruited into these movements. A lot of them have problems, folks. A lot of them have terrible, and and the problems are within themselves. You see. but they'll externalize it when they get their fellow brothers and sisters together to go after the general society. And what do you see? You have mayhem when mayhem breaks loose. I'm not talking about the shooting of the black people. I'm talking about the mayhem of those that jump on the bandwagon, the real movement behind it all, that they'll keep it going and benefit from it. Of course they will. And when they start literally elevating other lives above other lives, it's okay to kill black cops. It's getting promoted, and a lot of them have been shot and so on. Then you're in big trouble. You're in big trouble. And for right now, folk won't listen anyway, especially the young folks, I say, who think they're part of a revolution. They really do believe it. And Bezmenov said it, they get used, and when you can tell them they weren't listening to you, you take them up to a prison camp, they wouldn't listen to you. The system that they're going to bring in couldn't be bad, it's got to be beautiful and utopic. And he said, even if you kick them on the behind, he says, they still won't believe you. They're so far gone, contaminated is the term. Stalin used the same term, contaminated, that you can't reason with them. And so the system that they thought they were part of as a revolutionary movement will turn against them and get rid of them, because now it's a threat to them. That's what always happens. It's just... But again, it's like Peter the Hermit, as I mentioned before, who was a kind of monk. But I've no idea what denomination, if any at all, but he was a monk, and he encouraged youngsters. There was a lot of youngsters who, again, at that time, were orphans or just on the street in waves the whole thing, or their parents had died of starvation often, things like that too. And he encouraged them all to start going to the Holy Land, this miraculous place, utopia, and where Jesus was born, and they were the first crusade. Thousands of them danced their way, they say, danced across Europe. They gave them dances and everything, you see. They always give them drum beats, dances and so on. You'll see it all down through the centuries, the same technique being used, because when something works, you don't toss it out the window. Use it again. And they would dance into almost a euphoric state, you see, of fatigue and probably starvation too, and use them. And of course they end up getting over towards the Holy Land, and then they were getting captured and slaughtered and turned into slaves and sold off and all the rest of it. You see, that's what happens. And if you told them, and a lot of folk did tell me at the time, you can't go over there, it's terrible, it's completely different from they won't see you as the same people, though, and they'll use you and abuse you and sell you or kill you. And they did, that's what happened. And the youngsters wouldn't listen either. That's the technique that's used. Well, no, it's a utopia over there. Why are you telling us that, you bad, nasty adults, you fossils, you? And that's the way it's used. For a better tomorrow. And the greater good. Remember that phrase? The greater good. I love it for warfare too. They always even had it in the movie Brazil, the comedy. And you'll see the signs everywhere. We're all in it together. We're all in it together. And they're using all the same slogans, for COVID. We're all in it together. Really, really. Well, why can't we all go out in the street shoulder to shoulder for any little cause? Even just to get sunshine, eh? A little bit of sunshine and some decent, vitamin D from your metabolism in your skin. Why not some of that then, and just stand shoulder to shoulder? Forget the 6-foot stuff, just like I did with the recent protests, and it's okay then. But why can't you do that? Why can't you, right? How can you authorize who can endanger others and who can't? How can you authorize that according to the causes? Well, it's not meant to be logical, you understand. The world you're in now is to become more and more and more illogical until fear and terror will rule you. I'm not kidding. I knew people whose parents were of Irish descent in Scotland, and some of them a lot of them actually had come over in the 1800s, late 1800s, and I'm talking about like their grandparents and so on were still alive when I was wee. And they were nasty, the kids. If the kids were slacking with anything or they're packed in work, and I'm not going to do that work, because they were raised. The famine wasn't just a few years. The memory of it lasted for a long time, right in the 20th century. And their grandparents would still go to town with them. out of a form of panic. In other words, you don't understand what you don't understand but the work ethic is so important. You've got to survive. You don't understand. You can't just pack in jobs and change and so on. They still had that fear, that hope. It was life or death, remember, that whole time. Life told. And that gave a legacy to the offspring like you wouldn't believe. It lasted a long time. Total terror, sustained terror, of real terror of life and death, will last one or two generations, at least. And it will also help destroy the family unit, because it's run by fear and in reaction to panic and fear. You have to do what you're told and all pull together, or we're all doomed by the time you're a danger and to yourself, maybe to others too. Yada, yada, yada. That's what happens, folks. That's what happens when thousands of folk have died. And it really was manufactured starvation. That was a form of genocide. There's no doubt about it. And don't say it wasn't, or they didn't do that kind of. As I say, they turned the troops loose on the Highlands of Scotland after Bonnie Prince Charlie went back. He went over to France actually, but they wiped out thousands, maybe much more than just the thousands of the Highlanders, coast to coast, and islands. And I mean men, women, and children. You know. And afterwards, they always try to hide it, cover it. Well, it wasn't that bad, because this is what they always do. Rather than tell you what really happened, they'll cover it up. Well, it wasn't that bad. They got the worst ones and so on, and the real revolutionaries. And yeah. And they weren't revolutionaries. They were in rebellion, really. It was to keep the same system that they'd had, as opposed to going to a new system with new kings and queens from a different country. That's what it was. But yeah, I mean, don't think that these things just happened in the past. You've been watching 30 years war in the Middle East alone that it never was in the interest of the average American. They say, what's it all about? Well, I'll leave that to you. But the fact is, the military generals all seem to be on board with it. And the Americans are going downhill and down the hill and down the hill as they have to pay for it all. And with the Americans, other folks in the West go down too, naturally. But yeah, it's about, you had the Desert Storm one, the first one. And then you had almost the war, then a 10-year flyover, and no-fly zones and military all around Iraq and so on. And then again, you had 2001, they went to town again. It had nothing to do with the tower, it didn't matter. And so you've had a 30-year war in the Middle East and in parts in Afghanistan as well. Yeah, quite some, isn't it? And we've all lived through it. And most folk, the ones even rioting right now, you think about this. Their sons and daughters in the black community too go into the military because, well, you're a somebody, be a somebody, and suddenly you got respect and all the rest of it, and some kind of honour and prestige that you never would have in the civvy street. It's the same in all classes too across the world. And that's how the armies really always do. They recruited from the lower classes, the cannon fodder. But think about it. We've all lived through it. This 30 years war. Where were all your leaders then protesting against these wars? It didn't happen. 30 years of it. And it's still going on. The US is still financing the groups that are attacking Syria. Why do you think the communist factions, they're all paid for by the big boys at the top? I mean, the big ones at the top. Why do you think they don't say, well, that's enough fighting like these other countries and so on? Why? Because, you see, they started off with the colour revolutions to overthrow. And when that doesn't work, then you get the real army started, or you fund the terrorists, you see, or just mercenary armies. I don't care what fancy name you give them, that morph to one name to the next, the same group. And again, the taxpayers in America pay for all, and Britain. But the thing is, they did it with what, Egypt as well, remember? Then Egypt voted in a guy, and then they got him out again. He wasn't secular enough, said the West. You see, under the communist, which is the totalitarian elitist group that runs the world, they don't give a darn about you, the ones at W.E.F. They want a destruction of all religions, you see. Don't you get that part? All religions want totally secular society, but then they can dominate it, because you can buy folk off in secular societies quite easily, and which they have always done. And then they can rule it all and plunder it, the economy, and plunder the taxpayers of the countries and so on for themselves. That's what W.E.F is all about, folks. Do you really believe they're there to help you? We're part of your community. We're here to help you. Do you really fall for that rubbish? And folk don't remember anything, eh? Yes, so a 30-year war with the Middle East, and they're still not finished with Syria, which was on the list back in the 90s, remember, of the PNAC group. And they must get rid of Assad, and put in a completely secular society. They've already destroyed a whole bunch, so many religious communities. We paid for it all to be destroyed. And some of the earliest Christian sects, all obliterated. Where was the humanitarians marching the streets then for, how can we slaughter these poor folks over? These weren't rich people. We're slaughtering these folk because they were Christians. And the groups, the Islamic groups the mercenary groups that were funded, they were paying to do it all, were beheading folk. Well, again, where was the outrage? Didn't happen, right? Yeah, be a follower and get used, folks. You'll never see the picture as a follower. And that's the truth of it. Now, when you look at what's been demanded by the front people in the protests and the riots too, it's more than just fair laws and so on, and fair trade. It's the sustainability program that they designed at the very top at UNESCO and other organizations belonging to the United Nations and Agenda 21 and the World Economic Forum. It's all the same group, by the way. And you have this article here, for instance. It's quite interesting, from a few years back. And it's about sustainable development. Now, even many of them who are protesting and demanding, we can't open up until we get fairness and from the COVID thing. Same thing, by the way, in the World Economic Forum and the Club of Rome and many other organizations, all the front groups for sustainability are all out saying, we can't open up and go back to the old way where we had cars and things, and we want to go back to this primitive utopia of nice weather and walking and bicycles and things. I like to try that in Canada when it's snows up to your neck or higher. But facts don't matter, you see. It's for depopulation and bringing down the numbers, basically. If you're sick and you can't get, if you're not sick and you can't get heating, you're going to get sick very quickly, and the population will drop and they can't afford the energy or get access to the energy to keep them warm or to cook with or anything else, by the way. And that's how you bring down populations and whole societies. Under wonderful sounding names. We'll all live in a happy utopia of Disney, I think I saw it in a Disney movie once, and the sky was always blue. And it was just perfect weather, and people worked and smiled as they weren't toiling in the fields. They'd be smiling an awful lot and happy as they planted all the crops. It must have been easy, etc., etc. But of course, the ones who have bring you into revolution won't be doing the digging and the planting and the harvesting and the heavy work. Of course, that's just the way it goes. We've seen it all before in the Soviet Union and in China and elsewhere. But this article here is the UN Decade of Education for Sustainable Development. And that's ESD, is Education for Sustainable Development. So those ones out in the streets right now, are around 18 to 20, have had the last 10 years of a massive indoctrination already, and even before that, into what's happening now. All makes sense. As long as you get the same agenda through, getting rid post-industrial, naturally. They want to go into a post-industrial society. I mean, a pre-industrial society. Well, folk were dying like crazy in a pre-industrial society, but they were often, the childbirth was horrible with illnesses and so on, and malnutrition, etc. But that's what they want to bring upon you for the good of the planet, you understand? So that always demands sacrifice. So much must always be sacrificed for the good of all. It's just the old ancient religion recycled over and over, isn't it? And it works awfully well, the same formula. But yeah, it's going to take sacrifice. It's like the COVID idea. Well, it'll hit mainly the old folk. Well, the flu hits mainly the old folk in a bad way, that is, and kills them too, and yada yada yada. But that's let's get the numbers up by putting infected folk into the old folks' homes by law, like New York City did, mandating it. That's murder. That's planned murder to get the numbers up, as we know. And the facts don't matter as long as you get the numbers up. And you got to understand what I said before about beheading the folk. I mean, there's many ways to kill folk, and sticking them into infected areas is another way to do it. This is as old as the hills, using bacteria or viruses, diseases for warfare purposes. They used to put parts of corpses, and sometimes the whole corpses, over the walls in cities that or castles that were besieging, or city-states, as they called them too, their main cities, high walls. They'd fire them over the walls in the big catapults, and the abelisks, etc., whatever they called them, the big catapults. So anyway, the midpoint of the decade is a good moment for the international communities. You always have these terms that are so vague because they're meaningless. International community. Where are you a community of? To reflect, we're all to reflect on its understanding and commitment to the decade. Did you know you're all dedicated in a commitment to the decade? It's also a moment to take stock of what's been achieved so far, blah, 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 blah. This 2009 Educating for Sustainable Development Global Report Learning for Sustainable World Review of Context and Structures for Education for Sustainable Development presents a succinct but insightful overview of the context, con is a good part, in which regions and countries around the world are trying to develop education for sustainable development and related forms of education and learning. No, that's indoctrination, folks. This is indoctrination, social engineering. Regional and national realities have shaped how the development and promotion of ESDs have occurred, thereby engendering. You think words are just there by accident. It's to promote ideas in your head by using certain words, right? And engendering a variety of interpretations of ESD, not TSDs, but or SDTDs, but ESDs. In the next half of the decade, we need to focus on finding the unifying dimensions in our thinking about ESDs and work toward. We need to do that, you understand, right? Collectively, towards identifying ways to translate general themes into particular applications responsible to local needs, you see. So here's all the reports for things you'd never get to vote for. It all comes down from the top and implement into your educational systems to brainwash the children. And it goes on and on. Every year you get the same stuff just churned out like you wouldn't believe. These massive agencies that you think, when you think you're living in democracy. Quite amazing. But they go through the plans for the future and the structures and formal and non-formal education. See, a lot of it's non-formal. It's you don't know you're being brainwashed watching television, do you? And sustainable development, research and development, and ways forward. Well, I just saw something recently to do with the opening up. It includes all the same goals, opening up from COVID. We can't have this and we can't have that, and we mustn't go back to the old system. But by the Club of Rome, do you vote for? No, you don't vote for them. Why don't you just admit you're under some strange oligarchical control of corporations and think tanks? Why don't you just admit it, folks? Because you don't have any kind of democracy at all. You really don't. So let's get back to I won't go through all this. I'm just mentioning it. You can look it up yourself. and go through UNESCO, the big organisation that Julian Huxley was all for and helped to fund and start up, on behalf, again, of the private group that gave you United Nations, that gave you all the other agendas of the empire of the day, and including, Planned Parenthood. That was all part of it too. They get taught about yada 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 yada. And your education is all helping to fund this, all your money, so they can brainwash your children into ways that you can't even imagine. Well, maybe you can imagine these days if you watch a lot of TV. You've already had your mind bent, I'm sure, in all kinds of directions. But they go through structures in informal and non-formal education, ESD, research development, and ways forward. There are always way forward, you see, as though it's going to happen by itself. Nope, it's all made to happen. You don't get a say in anything. But they do go into the same old stuff. A sustainable environment on the planet, it says, and refers to development of natural ecosystems in ways that, so you're part of the ecosystem, that the carrying capacity of the earth and respect the non-human world, right? So it's the carrying capacity of the earth. That's too many sustainable economic developments, and they put that down into prosperity, right? Not austerity, but they call it prosperity just to throw you off the track. Sustainable economic development focuses on the development of economic infrastructure in which the efficient management of our natural and human resources is important. When did you become a human resource? It is the finding of balanced ways to integrate these dimensions in everyday living and working that poses perhaps the greatest challenge of our time, as this requires alternative ways of thinking and valuing, etc., and acting. Well, when you go through the gobbledygook of the public relations propaganda here, and you start to catch on what all things are about, do you really think the folk at the very top, that use all movements, remember, and often create and fund the movements to bring in their agenda, give a damn about any individual ethnic group? Do you really think that? Do you honestly really think that? Huh? Oh, we're winning now, etc. This is from a few years back, this one here. And they go through chapter 36 of Agenda 21 on education, training and public awareness, which for UNESCO was designated as task manager, identifies 4 overarching goals. They always have lots of goals and like 5 and 10 and 20-year plans and stuff like that. That's standard communist technique. Run by the richest folk on the planet, though. You understand? Yeah. They don't care about labels. They give you labels to fight for. For whatever mindset you have, they've got a label fixed for it. You can just pick one yourself. They've got ready-made labels, you see. Yep. Oh, yeah. And all varieties and subsections of labels too, if you're not happy with the main one. And that's how it's done. It's always been this way by those that rule the world. It's always been done the same way. Now here's Lord Haig. Lord Haig calls lockdown. We need lords to tell us what we already know, But you understand, once again, it takes a somebody to tell us what we already know before it becomes talkable, mentionable, I suppose, but I like talkable. So Lord Haig calls lockdown a national disaster. No kidding. I wonder, he must be a genius too, and demands immediate end to the 2-meter rule after new numbers show 600,000 dive in payroll workers and benefit claims soar by 125%. So the grim figures show the numbers of workers on payroll dropped 600,000 March, May. And Conservative leader has brandished lockdown disaster for society. He's backed former Labour Prime Minister Tony Blair's calls. He has backed me for mass testing. I'm not surprised Tony Blair's got his fingers in the pie. He's got very lucrative pies, and so Tony Blair's calls for mass testing, quite interesting. The same Tony Blair that waved his hands a lot to a one-man band to get Britain into the war across the Middle East along with the US. The guy who doesn't believe in having positive freedom and stuff like that. Lord Haig's comments in Telegraph come ahead of new unemployment figures. So here's your double speak here, right? So let's get mass testing and forget if this 6 feet rule, even though the 6 feet rule again was dreamed up by a schoolgirl, supposedly on behalf of her daddy, who worked for the military industrial complex, all doing computer programs, basically, projections of what would happen, and they came up with this fantastic, farcical, mythical idea of 6 feet. You know, it means nothing. It means literally nothing in medicine at all. It's a brand new idea. But again, you've got to do crazy things like wear masks and stand 6 feet apart, and etc., etc., etc. So this is in a sign of the carnage to come. Official figures show the number of paid employees dived 2.1%, or 612,000 between March and last month. The breakneck decline is particularly worrying, with figures this morning showing the government's furlough scheme is now propping up 9.1 million jobs, many of which might never return as UK reels from the pandemic. Mm-hmm. Well, is this all planned this way? How do you get the folk into austerity? Shut down the entire economy. Pay them to stay at home by borrowing money, even though it's all fictitious money. And bring them out of it by complete testing forever, the rest of their lives, by the way. This isn't just for one little thing. This is for the rest of your life. Hope you understand what they're talking about here. Forever and ever, amen. They're even talking about giving you measles vaccines. That's another little thing. Because folk were wanting a measles vaccine, right? And so they came up with this one. If you give that, it might help against coronavirus, they said. The COVID-19. Wow. Where's the proof of it? Well, we don't really have any. I bet it might. Waving smoke in front of your face from sage might help it too. Probably a bit more than the cons. Another one too says, the worst hit for workers appears to have been masked by the government's massive furlough bailout scheme, with experts. We need experts to tell us we're in a mess. Warning of 1980s levels of unemployment by the end of the year. Well, they're working hard towards it by keeping you locked down, eh? Oh, it's spiking again. My goodness, what would happen if we let the folk out of their homes? Then natural immunity might just happen by itself, like it always has done before. So if we lock them up, they can't get the herd immunity. So when we do let them go, it'll start spiking. Oh my goodness, we are surprised. Really? In other words, they're testing. These are not folk who are sick. These are not folk that are sick. These are folk the same. Their testing says that they've had it or they've got it, but they're not sick. And that's what most folk don't know they've had the flu every year. Some folk get awfully sick with it, some don't. Anyway, they're pushing ahead to get the austerity in, you see, with mass testing. It's bigger than that, though, you see. They always give you little ones here and there. Like, this is an individual guy's idea. That's what that is. No, it's not. They've got lots of little individuals to put in front of you. So, you know, we should really get testing done, mass testing, etc. I mean, until you think, well, I guess if so many folk are all for it, then it must be the right. No, they're all getting paid to say this, folks. It's the agenda. Fauci said at the beginning, you know, you're never going to get back to work until you take our vaccinations. And then you get testing all the time, blah, 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 blah. Right? That's quite amazing. This other article too is the globalist elites to gather in Swiss resort town to plan the post-COVID Great Reset. I've got the articles from a few years ago saying the same thing from the same group. They said we have to get a good reset here of the money agenda, sustainable. And it says the objective is rebuilding the world's economic and social system in order to make it more sustainable. Too many of you again, eh? Too many of you. And as folk try to get their autonomous zone set up, that where no money is going to come in, they think they're going to get saved by the World Economic Forum and all the rest of them. Do you think they're going to keep us all around as pets when we have no work? Do you really believe that? With their fine-sounding speeches, etc.? Power to the people, etc. Really, do you really believe that? These folks in the previous articles from a few years ago were saying the same thing. We're going to make well, here's your planned Great Reset right here, now, right? And it says nothing will ever be the same again. It was a mantra that we heard in many countries at the height of COVID-19. So it came with a warning that a new normal would replace the existing order. Easy travel, interpersonal relations, large gatherings, even things like shaking hands would have to give way to long-term social distancing, drastic rules and surveillance. But it's for the good of all, the greater good, eh? Of corporations that get the apps and get the surveillance equipment and get all the billions thrown at them. The greater good. But these changes on the personal level are only part of the picture. The World Economic Forum, together with Prince Charles of England and the International Monetary Fund, has launched an initiative revealingly dubbed the Great Reset, with the objective of rebuilding the world's economic social system in order to make it more sustainable. Wow, that sounds good to me, eh? More sustainable. Right? What's better than a big juicy steak, a nice stale bit of bread? That's from that other movie too, eh? It's all coming back, isn't it? And Prince Charles, remember, was the guy they put forward by the World Economic Forum and all the top other groups that are there from the elite classes. They put him forward years ago to start to kick off the public-private partnerships where the public pay for everything for corporations, and they pay for that. You launch and even build them things and roads and everything. You give it to the private corporations to own it, and they take all the profit and you maintain it, and the taxpayer maintains it. Beautiful projects, these public-private partnerships. PPPs, eh? And but yeah, this is the same agenda, the same folks, and here you are. As folk are worried about, you're going to lose all your street. Well, yeah. And youngsters think that they're actually got a revolution on the go. The idea has received the full support of the United Nations Secretary General. Who cares what Antonio Guterres, former president of the Socialist International, wants, eh? That's his, communist. Don't forget what Quigley said. He says, oh yes, the Council on Foreign Relations, he says, we bring in communists and dictators, and in fact, we don't care who they are, he says, as long as they're on board with us. They do, all sides, they run all sides, folks. Antonio Guterres, the Socialist International from 1999 to 2005, technically, a reset is a reinitializing in the language of our digital era. It means erasing old hardware and data on a hard disk and formatting it anew in view of a fresh start. That's what it's like. It's like year zero in communism. They tried that in Cambodia on behalf of the CIA that was running a lot of stuff behind the scenes in Cambodia. And yeah, Lenin said the same thing. History is bunk, he says. So they always eradicate the past and destroy the statues, and it all starts with some latest guru figure that they give you to worship, and folk do, unfortunately, or they're made to, mind you. Since for many decades, the World Economic Forum, founded by Professor Klaus Schwab in 1971, has been getting heads of states and billionaires and heads of big businesses together yearly in order to reflect on economic and governance issues and work towards a common and free global trade, common world rules, to supersede national sovereign decisions, promoting non-discrimination to transform economies and societies. So these are all they use everything, you see, to make sure that there's whatever flavor of communism you like, they've got a special flavor just for you. And they go into the Davos meeting and so on. There's a massive organization with, there are thousands of folk that are trained by them every year, youngsters. They pick them in and train them to be future leaders for all the different parties across the planet. They can't lose, can they? And but yeah, it's too many of you, understand. And again, they want you start to not have children, and be awfully good to not have children. And just work hard for the great future, and then die off quietly. They'll help you die off quietly, in fact, with euthanasia. You'll be a good citizen then, you see. Young Revolution makes 8 demands for police reforms in Peoria. Police department responds. That's another article too. And it's comical too. You watch stuff that you don't understand as they bring out the police, take the police off work. And then you watch, they've already had shootings in some of these places, and murders around the areas, because now the cops aren't going to reply to anything. I mean, why would you? The cops have been told, really, you better not go into these areas anymore, and just let them, otherwise you might be charged. If something happens and you have to deal with it in whatever way it takes, you can't do there's no way you can do anything that's right anymore. And so the crooks and the murder, they already had quite a few murders, actually. And so the crooks themselves get a field day. They know the cops won't respond. If the cops do respond, Antifa will say, they're racist bigots, and etc. So so they won't do it. And so it'll get worse and worse until chaos rules. And then the government will bring in, because they want to bring in a centralized, and Soros does too, a centralized police system. And communism centralize. The World Economic Forum, a centralized governance body for the planet, for everything, trade, for everything, you name it. Centralized, Marx, centralized government, right? Standard stuff. And the folk never catch on to it. And again, the police, they're going to ban the use of chokeholds and stuff. That makes sense. And they didn't used to use these until they got trained by outside sources. But facts don't matter anymore. And it's quite interesting to what's happening. But again, Antifa would use that. Communists always sit waiting for a spike, as they say, of emotion, and they jump on the bandwagon, and then they take it over. Now listen, New York City, right, mayor, is quite amazing, that orders an army of COVID-19 contact tracers not to ask about BLM protest attendance. I think this one got banned before by the groups that put it out. But the mayor ordered an army of the new tracers. These are your new Stasi, by the way, if you haven't figured it out yet. It's not just to do with this, it's to do with everything for the forever into the future. Including your social credit system score and all the rest of it. All that stuff combined, believe you me. An army of COVID-19 contact tracers not to ask about BLM protest attendance, you see. So again, as long as you belong to the... And really, I'm quite serious about it. I said years ago, you better belong... If you don't belong to any special interest group or minority group, you better join one to get any rights at all. Otherwise, you're going to have no rights at all. And that's where we are now. We have no rights, you see. So try to find something and join it. I think Monty Python had a league of silly walks. If you're a silly walk, you could join it. But at least you'd have rights, right? And then you could really hit folk that laughed at you, because you'd say, hey, you can't mock me, right? Absolutely. There you go. So these contact tracers, again, as I said before, the whole agenda was on the card before COVID came along. It was all worked out before with the same groups of people that run the present show. And it's a Stasi type thing. They were to come into your homes and all the rest of it, break all the laws and rules of your home as your castle. The last vestige of any right at all in the West, really. To save you all, it's to save you. If there's anything not going around, do you want them coming in? They've been to 100 houses before you, and if one person in 100's had it, it's covered them. Now they're going to bring it to you. You understand? It's nothing to do with sanity at all. It's all social training for everybody. That's what it is. So the hundreds of contact tracing workers are hired by the city under de Blasio's new test and trace campaign. And de Blasio, too, is international, I'd say, definitely. So that test and trace campaign have been instructed not to ask anyone who's tested positive whether they've recently attended a demonstration. Well, I guess you have to put all the politicians in quarantine if that was the case, eh? I'll tell you. Monty Python is sane compared to what's happening now. Even though, the WHO, the World Health Organization, suggests that asymptomatic individuals, with more recent studies, right, rarely pass on the virus, they said. Before, oh my God, it's getting spread by asymptomatic people. Now it says, no, it's hardly ever happening. So there's no real anything here to do with it. The whole thing is a made-up thing. Really, it's a fluish type thing, whatever. But yeah, it's killing old folk, mainly because they can't even get treatment or proper treatment. And then they're putting them forcing them to go into old folks' homes where there's already infections present, or taking folk into homes which have no present illness there, and then bringing ones with the live virus in with us. It's just incredible. And you don't ever think they're stupid, folks. Don't fall for this. Oh, we just didn't think. Don't fall for that, eh? Don't fall for that. What happens at the top, the slightest whiff of a variation from any part of an agenda goes through about a dozen think tanks in every little part of it to see what the consequences could be if this happened and that. Nothing happens by accident. Oh, we didn't realize, No, don't think that. I do laugh too that in Aberdeen, someone sent me an article from Aberdeen in Scotland, and video and pictures, hundreds of turnout for Black Lives Matter protest in Aberdeen city centre. And this is northeast Scotland, This is the good-natured demonstration took place between 1 and 3 p.m. in Union Street. Was the largest of its kind in the city since the death of George Floyd in the U.S. What's the death in the U.S. got to do with anything in northeast Scotland? Across the world too, in Australia, everywhere, by the way. All worked out ahead of it, just waiting for the right incident to happen, and completely coordinated. The leaders all financed and paid. And the media all paid to get on board with it right off the bat, obviously. in the middle of the latest Great Depression, financial depression. Folk can't figure this out. The same governments, they're all on board at the W.E.F, who watched city after city getting slaughtered in the Middle East with the West's paid mercenaries under different names and guises. It's all the same group. And nobody said boo or a hiccup to that. Huh? But let's all be upset because one fella got killed and the cop is charged with murder. Which is law, right? No, there's always more happening, folks, believe you me. I tell you, but that's the main thing happening in Aberdeen there. And then you find that the Aberdeen City now councils, the city council gears up for easing of lockdown restrictions. Well, they're a bit late. I mean, they've already had their protests and stuff. They didn't give a damn about lockdown restrictions. So now they're going to go back to it. And for Scotland is like a communist country. It really is. I've said it before. It came out of this farce, Scottish National Party, which really was socialist, international socialist, and winning its rights to have its own country for the first time. What a farce that is, eh? And the first thing they do is open up its borders and boast about international socialism. Which means doing away with your borders. What was the point of getting it in the first place, then doing away with it? Kind of waste of time, eh? And then of course it came out under the EU, under their auspices and their dictates. And the same with Ireland did the same thing too, eh? They came out into freedom under a new master, which is bigger than the last one. What a joke. And then they've got First Minister Nicola Sturgeon. The characters that they put ahead of us is just astonishing. Is expected to set out the second part of the Scottish Government's four-phase plan to lift some of the conditions on Thursday. I don't know what the GDP of Scotland is. Because it's about 5 million population. It used to be pretty steady, about 5 million. And most of them today, a lot of the new births are all from outside. They admit that in their statistics. But people coming in and having children. But it's still a small population. And how are they, what are they supposed to do to keep folk locked down forever, keep paying them to sit at home? Where's it all coming from? I tell you. We'll keep the red flag flying high. There you go. International socialism. But then, it's such a farce, isn't it? That's what they give you for news, eh? Dictates from these people. Like Sturgeon. Whatever she said, there's always something awfully fishy behind it. Manipulating the masses. Edward Bernays. I won't go into that one. I've done it all before for years and years and years. But it's about group psychology and how Sigmund Freud too. Again, Bernays was a nephew of Sigmund Freud. It's a strange family, though. They were kind of, even Freud was having some kind of affairs with the different Bernays families, wives and things. Very strange thing. Anyway, it reminds me really of Darwin and the Wedgwood family. They seem to just be interbreeding with the same kind of family over and over and over. But that's my take on it. But it says the easiest way to divide people is through political theatre, and it's going to be a tough red pill for people to swallow, it says, and yada yada yada. But I've done all that before, not a folk of just repeating stuff I put out years ago. I think it's kind of boring. Actually, it's verbatim for some of my talks, some of it. So what we're going to get. And then this one here, I get World Economic Forum, the Centre for the Fourth Industrial Revolution, right? This is how they run the world. All the richest folk on the planet run the world, eh? The Centre for the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And real-world impact at the speed of now. Oh, I wonder how much they paid for their PR companies for the speed of now. Wow. Eh? We're not just developing new ideas, we're implementing them across the globe at the pace demanded by technological change. You must adapt to their technological society, you see. And you can't have any privacy in a technological society. I've already told that many times before. They keep telling you that. Most folk don't mind now, though. It says the Forum Centre for the Fourth Industrial Revolution is a newly established focal point within the international community for multi-stakeholder dialogue. That's not including you, though. And concrete cooperation on governance challenges and opportunities presented by advanced technologies. And you can download their brochure as they sell you the whole idea of it, isn't it? Okay? What do you think? And then they give you the Great Reset, this week's World versus Virus podcast. Now is the time for a great day. It is now is the time part again for a revolution, you see. You know, isn't that interesting? You always see what you're looking for. Now is the time for a great reset, eh? And how artificial intelligence and machine learning are helping to fight COVID-19. Machine learning, eh? There you go. And this was in other words, they're tracking traces and all the rest of it, and your apps, yada yada. That's what they're telling. It's helping to fight COVID-19. Not that you need to fight it in the first place. It says this was the year automation started taking over the workforce. And that's MIT News in with them. How the fourth industrial revolution can help us beat COVID-19. And robots have demonstrated their crucial role in pandemics and how they can help for years to come. Really? Wow, gee whiz. 5 ways collective intelligence can help beat coronavirus in developing countries. Well, how can we even fight it here with going to developing countries have to stay away from televisions and stuff and don't send folk off to the W.E.F. will be quite okay and safe. Maybe, how about that then, eh? How's about that? And they afford all the machinery to lose all the rights and freedoms that monetarism, etc. But the World Economic Forum too, as I've said before, just like the Club of Rome and all the other groups for the left, you think are left-wing groups, are really fronts for the big agenda, for the ultra-rich. But you're not going to get opening up after COVID unless you're sustainable. And they're going to have these commissars that come and inspect you and look at you and measure you probably. And smell you maybe. I don't know if you should open up or not. You don't smell left enough. And it says traveling, you see. Right? Their whole agenda was planned before this thing came out. Non-traveler digital identity, advancing secure and seamless travel. Right? This project is part of the World Economic Forum's Shaping the Future of Mobility platform. Seeks to develop and pilot a decentralized digital identity platform which leverages fourth industrial revolution technologies to help government and industry leaders, your fascists, facilitate seamless and more secure international travel. together with a community of travel security experts. Oh, that word experts gets me groveling right away. Oh my God, it's so wonderful. Policymakers, businesses, and international organizations. The project will achieve this by piloting the KTDI concept in cross-border contexts, in collaboration with, I guess they have rubber lips and mouths, these folk that speak this verbiage, in collaboration with consortium comprised of the Government of Canada. Of course, naturally, Canada's completely on board with it all, and the Kingdom of the Netherlands, Accenture Airlines, airports, and technology providers. The forums are currently piloting components of KTDI concept in a real-life cross-border context. And they go into advancing safer travel in the face of the COVID-19. Oh, it's to do with COVID-19, you see. It's to keep you all safe. So it's complete biometrics, blockchain, and digital identity is now more crucial than ever. And the forum will facilitate multi-stakeholder data. That's all the rich sods that get all the cash to gather insights and develop actionable strategies to promote more secure travel through improved totalitarian measures that get to travel and unless you take all their new ID stuff and get monitored all the time in real time for the rest of your lives, folks. That's what this is, if you don't know what it is. Yeah. So there you go. Developing tools and guidance for scalability with the end goal of global interoperability. Interoperability. Recently published the KTDI Specs Guidance White Paper describes the technical foundations underpinning the KTDI platform. Now, they know that the average person doesn't have a lifetime to spend reading their verbiage, you see. What you're looking at is a multi-layered, massive bureaucracy, way above your government level, all privately owned. But throwing it at your governments and telling you to get on with it. And to get, they don't have any kickback from the government, so they're quite happy to receive the kickbacks, maybe, who knows. And another one is global new mobility. Again, you can't open up unless you get out of that car and all that. Right? So the project is part of the World Economic Forum shaping the future of mobility platform. Oh, there you go. It's about mobility. They want to make sure you're mobile. Is that what it is? I don't think so. So here it is, the Global New Mobility Coalition, the GNMC, they always got this, curated by the World Economic Forum, is an active and diverse community. Oh, that means it's a diverse community of over 150 globally renowned experts. Oh, there's the experts. You get shivers up your spine when you say that word. NGOs and companies for accelerating the shift to shared, electric, and autonomous mobility. There you go. So no more you driving yourself. It's going to be shared, you see. Electric and autonomous system that provides for healthier cities, reduces carbon emissions by 95%. I think they use the same computer for global warming and climate change, and that Neil Ferguson used for exaggerating the COVID problem. Improves mobility efficiency by 70% by stopping you from traveling. And decreases commuting costs by 40% because you can't afford and you won't be allowed to travel. So naturally it's going to decrease commuting costs. You just won't commute. While tapping into a $600 billion business, which the W.E.F characters that are in it will own, you understand. They'll own it all. But it's for the good, the greater good. They only own things for the greater good, to make sure that you're all living safely for sustainability. The GNMC publicly communicates a sustainable mobility vision to civic, public and private stakeholders in order to catalyze supply and demand for carbon-neutral mobility ecosystems by 2050. We used to think it was so terrible, but how communists talked. It was a different language, you know. Now, this is the same stuff here, but the folk really brought you communism. So GNMC also forms public-private partnerships, naturally, now with taxpayers' money to fund their programs, to accelerate SEAM operations, SEAM adoption through agile policy design, and I guess I must give you a dictionary to read this article, and experimentation in hand-picked cities, and iterates learning to a broader network of stakeholders. I thought we were going to go vegetarian, and here's all these folk that are stakeholders. I mean, we aren't going to get any. We can't afford the steaks, folks. Right? So here you go. To inform positive actions, it's steered by the World Economic Forum. Oh, what a coincidence. Climate Works, what a coincidence again. University of California. Davis, oh, that's really a coincidence. China, EV100. Uber, naturally. Energy Foundation, China. Israel Institute of Technology, called Technion. Lyft via BMW, Ford and Uber among its key partners are C40, OECD, International Transport Forum, Mass Alliance, MAAS, Europe Polis, POLIS network of cities, and the World Bank. Oh, what a coincidence. It's the same group that have been running the world for an awful long, for over 100 years anyway. Yeah. But that's just coincidence. It's just that they're better at it, because they do it for your good, you understand, for sustainability. So the challenge, and to get, yes, they take a bit of, profit for themselves and buy islands for themselves and have special underground cities even built in case anything really unforeseen broke out. But, well, that's their right. They sit there. It's like Dr. Kildare, when they were brainwashing the women of the world, that the Dr. Kildare was the guy they all wanted to marry, that he just couldn't stop worrying about his patients. He hardly slept. He'd get up in the middle of the night and, my God, Eureka, that's what she's got. Now he knew how to treat her, you see. So these folk are entitled, the World Bank and all, to make a little bit of profit, right? Off your money with public-private partnerships. You pay for their businesses. That's only fair, right? And so it gives you the challenge, supportive policy frameworks, and it says, and the mission to co-develop, pilot and scale awareness building and policy initiatives that promote the benefits of shared, for themselves, electric and automated mobility technologies, that's SEAM, S-E-A-M, to society and the environment. So they're in charge of the world and the environment. They're the gods of the air, powers of the air and the earth, everything that walks and crawls and flies and burrows. They're the gods of it. Nothing much changes from the days of Egypt to the present, In the old days, of course, they just forced you to worship. And because you're superstitious, you say, well, my God, okay, there's a God for everything on the planet. So that in ancient Egypt, you'd worship. It seemed kind of makes sense to you, especially when you need crops and stuff, and you might get a plague of something one year, and that can put you off. And sometimes the Nile wasn't flooding as it should do, and so things were kind of iffy. But these guys today, they're on top of all the problems before they even happen. They've got lots of stuff to implement to make it all work, right? Oh yeah, that's right. Well, they didn't think to ask you to vote for them because they have to get things done fast and save you. You see, if they let you know what was going on, you might haggle and argue, and we'd all die. We'd all die, And they might have to use some of their profits for their own businesses instead of public-private, using your money to fund and run and for all their businesses. And it says the opportunity. Research shows that SEAM solutions contribute to sustainable mobility. However, with the rapid pace of technology change, the appropriate enabling environment remains unclear. Therefore, we see an acute need to co-develop awareness and policy. They're good at that, mind you. They can co-develop awareness of things that don't even exist, and policy jointly with decision makers, the folk that are going to rule you over things that don't exist. Private sector companies, researchers, and other stakeholders, the high priesthood, see? So there you go. A coalition comprised of an active and diverse multi-stakeholder community, big corporations, is better positions to drive a balanced and credible transition. This is the age of transition for the century, to a more sustainable transportation future via SEAM than individual actors. In other words, if you did it all yourselves, instead of this big club that you can't join, it just wouldn't work out the same way. It would be a lot cheaper. Yeah. Well, you get what you pay for, Also, too, same World Economic Forum, right? Okay. What is an immunity passport? Thank God these folk are on board. They're on top of everything here, right? We don't have to do anything at all except watch fantasy on television. What is an immunity passport, and could it work? So it says, here they go. They've got the World Bank involved and a whole bunch of organizations involved. So it says, weeks into lockdown and with economic indicators signaling a deep global recession, no, it's a depression, governments around the world are searching for ways to get their countries back up and running. But emerging from a cocoon state could risk a second spike of coronavirus infections as people start mixing once more. Amongst the measures being considered by governments, including Chile, Germany, Italy, Britain, and the US, are immunity passports. Thank goodness that they're all on top. You didn't know they were doing all that on your behalf, did you? Oh my goodness. You thought your government was a lazy bunch of sods, didn't you? You really did. But all this time they've been working with the W.E.F. and big tech, using your tax money to get immunity passports. Okay, they get paid well for all that, those companies, but they deserve it, keeping you safe, right? So it's a form of documentation given to those who have recovered from COVID-19. Now listen to this. A form of documentation given to those who have recovered from COVID-19. Now Canada and all these countries had articles and documentaries out in the 90s with Wendy Mesley show, where Canada was way into the biometrics long before anybody else. You know, fingerprints, eye scan, the whole thing. And here you go. But here they're telling you it's really, well, the latest thing is COVID-19 to make you all get it, you see, all the holdouts. So it says, in Chile, which looks to be become the first country to put such a scheme into action, the so-called release certificate, as they call it. They call it a release certificate. You're in prison. Would free holders from all types of quarantine or restriction. Well, there's your way out of it. Buy your way out, folks, you know, and get a complete bioimmunity passport. Oh, it's shared by governments and government agencies of all countries and high-tech companies. They'll all share it, you see, for your own good, obviously. And then you can go around freely, right? And they'll take their cuts of monitoring you, watching you and studying you and banning you from whatever, eh? And it says, but the ideas prove contentious with the World Health Organization amongst those voicing criticism. They always have a branch that'll pretend to oppose them on behalf of you without you be asking them. The root of the concern for many is the unknown degree to which past infection confers future immunity. Now here's your key to it all. Remember, Fauci said at the beginning, oh no, he says, you've got to get the vaccine. You say, oh yeah. That was on the cards before you even heard of COVID-19, or even he heard of it. But it was all planned this way. Because, you see, you always get herd immunity, or you're done for. The whole world will be done for. That's how it's been up until the present. Now they're saying, we don't know. This might only last for a month or two, your own immunity, right? So you'll need to get retested every 3 months, even though you're immune right now. You might lose your immunity in 3 months. This is to be forever and ever, amen, folks. I hope you're getting the picture, eh? But they planned this before you even heard of it. You see, getting your own herd immunity is not profitable, and it doesn't confer authority onto the ones who already have grabbed authority over you. Huh? So it's... But again, you have the World Economic Forum, the richest folk on the planet, and richest corporations on the planet, and richest bankers on the planet, have all decided to help you, stakeholders, communities, governments, business, and individuals understand the emerging risks and follow-on effects generated by the impact of the coronavirus. They don't know themselves. Don't wear a mask. No, wear a mask or you'll get fined. Don't go outside unless you're allowed. Why are you outside? Don't go a walk. Oh, now you can get a walk for today, about 20 yards more. Oh, don't go with anybody. Don't be any closer than 6 feet. Oh, it's okay, let's half it in two. And here they're pretending to tell you your own immunity might be gone in 2 or 3 months. We don't know, they said. But it's better be safe than sorry. Let's do a complete bioscan and get an immunity passport for you. This is a lifelong passport. You can't go anywhere and do anything without the passport. You can't even get in a store. I mentioned this in the 90s, this would come. I said, you're going to a store and even get food, and alarms will go off if you haven't got your tattoo or your chip with all your vaccinations on it. Ah, yeah. Life is kind of boring with deja vu, eh? Yeah, in Chile's case, the certificate you'll get, after going through it all, right? What you got to make sure is repeat business for the big corporations that have got all this technology and so on. As it says, your certificate will expire 3 months after a confirmed infected person has recovered. After this point, they will be considered to have the same risk of infection as anyone else. And yet you can't win, folks. You can't win, eh? This is as good as it gets. Eh? They got it all figured out, eh? Even though other people, biologists and biochemists and the whole have come out that work at these labs and saying your own immunity will last generally 3 years generally for any particular COVID or any other kind of COVID variety strains, and even longer. They've done tests for stuff even for folk who had SARS. They've still got antibodies 10 years later, things like that. Anyway, this is the whole agenda, folks, for sustainability. And if most of you can't, they'll just say, well, there's been too many folk travelling this month. It's not sustainable, and it's put too much carbon in the atmosphere. Even the cyclists that are breathing heavy, and other folk too that are breathing heavy, even though they're not supposed to be doing that during this pandemic. We're just going to lock you all down to fulfill our quota and get the quota back to normal of, CO2 reduction. World Bank COVID-19 recession. Again, the same group, eh? is expected to be twice as bad as the 2009 financial crash. So you lost 40%, right, of the value of your currency because the last big con. And they things don't disappear, folks. Things don't just go bankrupt. Real businesses, real machines, all these things are real. They're taken over by the folk that causes the crash. That's how they do it. There's nothing new about that. And it says that it's from the World Bank's website, so you can read it for yourselves, and there you go. So it's going to be twice as bad as the 2009 financial crash. Well, you might get a few cents left at the dollar, but sustainability and austerity. That's how you bring folk down into poverty. Austerity, you see. Well, they're forcing it, folks, and it all happens for the greater good, But that's coincidental. And then you have this one here too. That's quite amazing. You've had the whole thing with Epstein. Again, it had to get disappeared really quickly. It was just too hot to handle with intelligence agencies and blackmail and all that kind of stuff going on, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. 900 suspected paedophiles are arrested. Right? 900 of them. As darknet child porn kingpin is jailed for 30 years. It was in May 2017. This came out, the story, but I thought it was interesting that this is 900 of a global dark web paedophile ring sprawling across Europe and the Americas have been arrested following a 2-year investigation. The FBI and Europol reported after the website's founder was handed a 30-year jail sentence. And shedding light on the scope of the operation, which is still active, the FBI revealed that in the US alone, 350 arrests were made as part of a wide-ranging investigation into Playpen. They called it Playpen, a secret website that's being referred to as possibly the biggest child porn online dump that ever existed. And it says, so they pat themselves in the back for it and all the rest of it, right? It says, but this was worldwide. It says, in countries far and near, it says, including Turkey, Peru, Chile, Ukraine, Israel, and Malaysia, according to the FBI. And accounts for a major share of arrests and convictions, blah, blah, blah. A total of 870 arrests were made in connection with the case, according to Europol. And it says over 300 children who had suffered sexual abuse at the hands of Playpen members have been identified or rescued. So here's the kind of money they put out on this. This is worldwide, right? And the FBI is at it, and the whole thing. Now they've got total access to everybody's data. Look at all the folk who have been looting the stores. You've seen it, eh? It's up on YouTube all over the place. stores getting broken into, and hordes of folk just going in and ransacking very quickly, too, very efficient, the stuff and computers and God knows what else, and TVs and yada yada, and these stores, Do they really think in this day and age that they don't know who's doing it? Do they really think that? Do you remember, too, a few years ago, they came out with NSA programs and ones we're using for China. And they said it didn't matter if you folk wear masks or not. They could tell because they had measurements. It's all automatic between your eyes and eyes to the bridge of your nose, etc., and the temples and all that kind of thing. It's instant. You actually see it in some of the modern stuff. They show you that. China showed us some great stuff initially, with glasses getting handed out to police at railway stations and airports, and everybody coming off trains and so on immediately had their ID would come up around them, and these printed up versions of who they were would come on the screen, and instant facial ID and recognition. Even if it was 50 in front of the cop, everyone would just pop up in the glasses. And we've got it too, of course. So here you are so here's folks still breaking into places and burning cops' cars, which are paid by the community. One of the states, they burned 20 of the cop cars. They said it's all going to get replaced by the taxpayer. Public-private partnership, see? Anyway, so yeah, it said here the sentence, the main guy, Stephen W. Chase, and this is the kind of stuff that we're supposed to be concerned about this kind of, but meanwhile, the thousands that happened in Britain, remember, were all ignored for what 15 or 20 years. These gangs were going, they were grooming them and hooking them on heroin and cocaine, and send them out as prostitutes at 12 and 13 years old. And no one wanted to touch that, because it was Britain, you see. It was just too politically sensitive. So it's okay, everything's politicized today, and folks suffer. And if you're in the wrong country and the wrong people, you'll really only suffer. No one's going to help you. Nobody. So there's different values depending on what country you live in. On the life of the people who live there. Different values. And as I say, yeah, they can go after a whole worldwide operation, right? But folk think that they don't know who's causing trouble or who are the leaders for revolution, the violent revolutions. This is when they get into a violent stage, folks. It doesn't stop there. If they can go the next step further, they'll go the violence. And believe you me, a lot in the mob, when tempers are up and emotions go crazy, will go crazy. And that's what they want, really. You will see it in your lifetime. It won't be that far off, actually. And mass hysteria, it says. Media raises hysteria over Trump Tulsa rally after celebrating mass protests. Facts don't matter, as you know. It says on Saturday, President Trump announced plans to hold his first major campaign in Tulsa, Oklahoma, since the start of the novel Wuhan coronavirus here, COVID-19. But it says it appears that the Trump campaign announced it had received more than 1 million requests for tickets, etc. But of course, the media there are trying to stop it all. It says, there'll be a spike in super spreaders and so on for COVID-19, even though they've had the mass protests that took over the nation's cities and even drew participation from woke politicians. So everything's politicized. Facts don't matter anymore, as you well know, right? It's awfully important, of course, that they get what they think is left-wing in. And the left-wing will be completely on board with everything the world economic, the richest folk on the planet want. They're completely on board. Sustainable, yeah, and for the environment, sure, yeah. Atlanta cops continue to call out sick after scores were on no-show yesterday as cities claims it can handle 9/11 calls, and every officer is given a $500 bonus for civil unrest shifts. Would you risk your life for $500? Knowing that if anything happened and you even have to defend yourself, you're going to be in the wrong, and that your bosses aren't going to stand up for you? Well, of course you wouldn't. Of course you won't. The military won't do it either. If you don't get a strong command from the ones above you, from those in charge, they won't do it. So that's what's happening. Naturally, yeah. $500 bonus. I tell you, it's not good. Some places like Detroit, they don't even go into anywhere. Long before this happened, and that's pretty well normal there. Another one: Atlanta police officers in multiple districts walk off the job. I've got to put that one up too. And it says here, Belgian police, but the same protests across the world. You think it's all just happenstance and spontaneous, right? Sure. Dream on, Disneyland people. So Belgian police throw down their handcuffs in mass protests against media hostility and accusations of racism, fascism and homophobia. Same things, eh? Racism, fascism and homophobia in wake of Black Lives Matter demonstrations. So the whole thing's commandeered by the real real anti-fascists, which are fascists. But so yeah, the cops just have given up there. That's it. What else can you do, right? What can you do? And I'll put another one up too. It's to do with, as I say, there's no secret about Black Lives Matter. It was taken over a long time ago and set up really by Marxists. Again, using the networking when they bring in all disaffected groups, even creating some of the groups that weren't even groups beforehand, you see, to get folk with beefs that can't fit into society, all kinds of things like that, and use them, you know. So I'll put them up too. So, and hundreds of this is a good one too. Hundreds of households in Berlin are locked down after dozens of people test positive for coronavirus. Eh? So authorities placed 369 homes under quarantine after outbreak in German capital. Involved households in 7 locations, some with 10 people living together. And the official urged the locals to use a new contact tracing app, which was rolled out the day that they found all of them. Just coincidence that the tracing app was rolled out, and they want mandatory testing the same day that mandatory testing came out. Well, the more you test, the more you're going to find folk have either got coronavirus or had it. If it's a swab test, they're pretty well useless, so I wouldn't even give them any credence at all. And for the blood tests, other types of coronaviruses might show up positive for it too. A lot of viruses. You can have thousands of viruses in your system, different kinds, you know. And some of them you're born with some of them. They get them from your mum, a lot of them. And they're called harmless carrier viruses, you know. Folk are terrified. They don't know. Maybe a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing. So they make sure you get a little bit of knowledge. They won't tell you all the rest of it. And so whenever you hear, oh my God, it's terrible, I've got a virus. So, you stacks them that don't do any harm. But and even the ones that do you harm is something if you're at a really advanced age, or you've got other problems too, or you're on medications that lower your immune system. Unfortunately, a lot of folk on cancer treatments, you see, especially radiation chemotherapy, they really are in danger of getting any kind of bad disease, because the immune system is shot for a long time until it starts to come back again. So yeah, isn't it coincidence? They roll it out the same day, and making sure they're going to have this, to validate the fact that they're going to make it mandatory that you all get tested. And again, along with that will come the app. You see that you'll have to have the app. And it's got GPS. Early government suggests to use mobile phone tower information and GPS to coordinate the whole system. For the app prompted this with a backlash. The folk didn't quite swallow it right off They will eventually, though. That part of it, you see. They always do. Oh, well. It's basically that they get used to things just over time. Oh, well, okay. They're using Bluetooth technology that's standard in modern smartphones to track and trace everybody right now. Eh? It's amazing. I mean, East Germany especially, got rid of the Stasi, the secret police that were all through society, and everybody was informing and everybody and blah, 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 blah. And here you have the same damn thing again with the government. And it's to help you. Well, it's always the last lot to help you and to preserve the system. What's the difference, folks? This is worse, actually. Yeah. Another one, too, by Ron Paul. It says, is the second wave another coronavirus hoax? Just a week or so ago, the mainstream media and thousands representing the medical community told us we must throw out the stay-at-home orders and go to the streets to protest the death of George Floyd at the hands of the police. The COVID-19 virus will not bother people who are protesting this injustice, they said. The virus only attacks people leaving their homes to protest the stay-at-home orders. You know something, you're really under tyranny, you need humour. You really need humour when you're under tyranny. Yeah. Just now, after thousands of businesses, many of them black-owned, have been reduced to rubble, and innocent people in the inner cities no longer have anywhere to shop for the basic necessities of life, the mainstream media has backed off its non-stop coverage of the protest. Suddenly last week, they all simultaneously, it's true at the same time, embraced a new fear story to terrify the masses. A second wave of coronavirus was amongst us. Yeah, sure, you see. And that's how it's done. Then they go into the different states that are really pushing it. And it's just coincidence. It's everywhere Trump's going to talk. Yeah, it's just coincidence. Yeah. Very politicized, these viruses. And this article, too, is from a Canadian newspaper. One of the big ones, I think it is. I never read much of the Canadian papers, I must admit, because they're so PC and again, and they're so far beyond left. There's just one system, really. There's no left and right, really. It's one system, but very pronounced in Canada. And biowarfare experts question why Canada was sending lethal viruses to China. Well, that came out ages ago. That was August the 8th, 2019, right? And this is not new, you understand. So it broke out too with some of the scams that were going on. It's in a tabletop pandemic exercise, Johns Hopkins University last year, a pathogen based on the emerging Nipah virus was released by fictional extremists, killing 150 million people. A less apocalyptic scenario mapped out by Blue Ribbon US panel envisaged Nipah being dispersed by terrorists and claiming over 6,000 American lives. Scientists from Canada's National Microbiology Laboratory, NML, have also said the highly lethal bug is a potential bioweapon. But this March, the same lab shipped samples. This is last year, remember? Samples of the Henipavirus family and of Ebola to China, which has long been suspected of running a secretive biological warfare program. Are they kidding? Suspected? I mean, Fauci, remember, okayed a lot of this stuff to be sent to China and worked with. I even funded some of it. Come on here. Anyway, China strongly denies it making germ weapons, and Canadian officials say the shipment was part of its efforts to support public health research worldwide. Sharing of such samples internationally is relatively standard practice. But it's gain of functionality, right? But it says, but some experts are raising questions about the March transfer, which appears to be at the centre of a shadowy RCMP investigation and dismissal of a top scientist of the Winnipeg-based NML. And it's true, this Chinese scientist, is a woman, was working in this top lab in Canada. And she was still, I think, belonged to some of the top PLA, I guess, the People's Liberation Army, they call it in China. She still was a member of it. And they went to, it was a worrisome on a few fronts, the very fact that they were doing that. And China's growing investment in bioscience, looser ethics around gene editing, and it's very true, and other cutting-edge technology and integration between governments and academia raise a spectre of such pathogens being weaponized, he said. Well, that was all with the collusion of the US and Fauci and other organizations associated with them too. And Canadian lab, another one, immersed in arsenic probes, sent Ebola and another deadly virus to China. So it's two in the same story, basically. And again last year. And of course, Chile plans the controversial COVID-19 certificates. For those who haven't got it through their heads, they're going to make sure you all get these electronic certification of being free from infection, and you have to keep going back to get retested. And then, of course, they'll have, you have to start taking these other booster shots for their previous vaccinations and yada, yada. Yeah. It's so predictable. So predictable, isn't it? I remember mentioning too at the beginning of all this, I said, well, I really think China and the West is on board together to really push this whole terror idea of this virus. We're working together. Now, I mean, look at all the stuff they churned out from China. Oh my God, look at those big trucks going down, spraying massive, spraying behind them, this strange misty stuff, and going into stores and offices and doing the same thing. And oh, it's such activity and horror looking, yada, yada, yada. Then we followed suit after being told, of course, by Fauci that it probably wouldn't take off in America. Nothing to worry about, he says. Until his bosses really said, no, we've got to use this, Don't know how good crisis go to waste. And here's Beijing at it again, right? And China at it again. They lock down the cities, again, because about 100-odd people, so they say they've tested, right? It doesn't mean they're sick with it, they've just tested it. You'll constantly find folk that all test positive, even though they have no symptoms. And false or not makes no difference if you're using the swab test. But you constantly find more and more folk, you see. And they keep saying they're cases. No, they may have got them, but they're not invalid cases. They're not patients. They're not sick. You understand? So 100-odd people out of a population of Beijing population 2020, the current population, it says here, is 20,462,610. So you're going to lock down the whole city, maybe the country, because of 100-odd people. I mean, this is the farce of it. Yeah. I tell you, it's really astonishing what we get fed here. And of course, Britain apparently had paid for some other company to do their contact tracing app. Who knows how many millions they threw at their pals there, and then changed their mind afterwards. Once it's all, they're working on it, just changed their mind, and now they've got given it to Google and Apple, who are working together now. So Google Apple released coronavirus contact tracing technology for apps, it says. Yep. And this is just the same as having a Stasi system without the folk necessarily watching. They're going to monitor you electronically initially, then send the tracers out on you if you fully comply. And then you take their word for it. You were in the vicinity of somebody that had this, and they were within about 2 feet of you to passing on the street. Well, I don't remember that. That doesn't matter. Lock yourself up until we tell you. There you go. That's quite something, isn't it? And they try to tell you the identity of app users will be protected by encryption and anonymous identifier beacons that change frequently. Where have we had all this tripe before, since we first got the computer altogether, eh? Hack. Oh, we'll be very safe with your data. Oh, yeah. And anyway, and it will come all your DNA and everything in it. Oh, what a great boon for them all. And then it'll branch off into, we can tell you what you'll be prone to get, diseases and things. So maybe we should treat you before you actually get outbreaks of certain diseases or illnesses and stuff. Oh, really? Could you help? Oh, yes, that's what we're here for. Get your wallet out, eh? So predictable. We are a herd, aren't we? We're just a herd of animals to be used, really. Again, back to the FBI that tracked down all these pedophiles, but they can't. I mean, the same system that's worldwide. Remember, they have offices of the FBI in Canada. They set them up in 9/11, after 9/11, and they have them in Britain too. By the way, they all work together. All these organisations in the old Interpol system. Now it's Europol. Yada yada yada. They all work together. I think they still have an Interpol as well as Europol. But anyway. Yeah, they know everything that's going on in real time about everybody, everybody, yeah. But they're very, again, it depends how sensitive that whoever they're monitoring, whether they'll do anything about it or not. And all these folk going rioting and they're really thinking they're in the middle of a real revolution. And they've got facial recognition. FBI tracked down the white woman, I guess that's okay to say that, they see, because she's white, who set cop cars alight by tracing custom T-shirt that she wore at the Philadelphia demonstration to Etsy, E-T-S-Y, which led them to her LinkedIn and Poshmark accounts. She can afford a Poshmark account, eh? That's quite the communist, this one, eh? So her name is Lori Elizabeth Blumenthal, 33 years age. Faces 2 counts of felony arson for her role in setting ablaze 2 Philadelphia Police Department vehicles on May 30th. And it says, they're still trying, in the same article, it's saying that Black Lives Matter protesters and other peaceful demonstrators convened in the city to protest the killing of George Floyd, right? Peaceful demonstrators, but she was here setting fire to the cop cars. Well, there you go. So she faces a fine of up to $500,000. She'll get off with it. She'll probably get a medal, actually. I've read too recently that a lot of them that got arrested for setting fires to places and looting and they got a medal dished out for some organisation, but who knows, usually the same suspects, the usual ones, for suffering a night in jail, like a proud thing to be, to show you won't have children, and if you're really good, sustainable people, but to show anybody down through your life that I took part in that, yeah, it's a badge of honour. But anyway, this woman had distinct tattoos as well that they arrested here, and I said years ago, do you realise these tattoos are used for ID? Boom, there you go. They're really, what can you say? So her name was Blumenthal, 2 counts felony. And the FBI agents used the Instagram post of the burned cars along with 500 photos from various photographers to identify the wording on the woman's shirt. It says, "Keep the immigrants, deport the racists," the FBI agent explained in his affidavit in Vice reports. Agents discovered that the T-shirts was custom made and sold on Etsy and found that a user, XXMV, had posted a review about purchasing the shirt. The URL belonging to the Etsy was Alley Cat Lore, it's called, and it listed Philadelphia as being where the user lived. So they kept at it, and then it came up. They know who everybody is. They know everybody is. Yeah, guarantee you. If they want them, they'll go for them. If they don't, they won't. As the 11 face felony charges from the night of civil unrest, and more charges likely in coming weeks, state attorney says. And it's Tampa, Florida, Hillsborough County State Attorney, okay. Andrew Warren announced the charges for 11 people stemming from the rioting and looting that occurred during demonstrations in Tampa, late May. So 44 were arrested for looting and rioting in the University Mall area of Tampa. Now 11 people have been formally charged. We have the first batch, 11 defence, 15 felony charges, and there's more to come. So they're protesting the folk that own jewellery stores. There's one here. So they did wipe out, clean out jewellery stores, and it says that they were burglarising homes, they were burning and burning gas stations too. Interesting. So there you go. Yeah. Smashing windows, took cash registers, and of course I think they had a little video of a woman, Badr Unisa, whose store, Badr's hair and all was broken into. She had 32 employees. Now they're all out of work. They attacked her store. Again, that intensifies the problem, which is what communists do. They don't help the problem, they make it worse. That's to get revolution going, eh? Sadder stuff. And an article too, I've mentioned before that Gaddafi's Libya from 2013, as a write-up says, was Africa's most prosperous democracy, and it was. For the whole country, he was bringing in a gold reserve for his country and for Africa. They had to get rid of him, and they did. Yeah, they certainly did. And but yeah, the most prosperous country in Africa. And their Article 2 is a book. It's actually a book about it's called New Left Tyranny. It's about gangster state capitalism. This is a story of capitalism freed labour from bondage by making labour the private property of the person. Serfs who owned labour obligations to lords became free individuals. Free labour markets and emergent capitalism made productive by technological advancement created with time rising living standards and a free people determined to protect their independence by holding government accountable. Well, that was a good myth and dream, wasn't it? This system was eventually wrecked by banks that financialized the economy and diverted discretionary personal income to the payment of interest and fees to banks. Well, now they're just throwing your cash money out to big corporations that are here to help you and save you from COVID. That's the same thing. But anyway, back to this article, and it says, by global comparison, that moves the first world jobs to Asia, thus raising their profits at the expense of domestic consumer purchasing power and living standards. Of course, the W.E.F was behind that big push too, along with the CFR. First world workforces were re-served as part-time jobs, and that's true. If they give you a full-time job, they might pay your pension plans, insurance and healthcare, and even so he'd put them on part-time. That was forced by the last crash, by the same W.E.F characters that are running the show today, who owned all the corporations and stuff. So you end up part-time with no health pension benefits, and that replaced the security of a middle-class existence, etc. So it's probably a decent read. I haven't read it, but it goes into what's happening across the world, and tyranny can be the only outcome of what's happening. Democracy is touted everywhere in the Western world. The traditional ethnicities feel powerless and unable to affect how they are governed. Dissent is censored by the ruling elites who have been in place powerful means to control explanations and to implement agendas that the people do not support. Well, isn't that the truth? Isn't that the truth? But even if you have a dissent, before you even think it, they already know you're thinking it pretty well. Most folk blab things out. And it really is. It's astonishing how much data they collect in every single person on a daily basis. I want to just go in now to this topic because it's important. It ties in with your bio this and bio that, and the World Economic Forum again, into it's almost a post-transhumanist agenda. Don't forget too that Julian Huxley of UNESCO, that's Aldous' brother, Julian, who again, he also was a co-founder of Planned Parenthood for reducing the population. They're the wrong kind of people, etc. And he was quite blatant about his form of socialism, which is the real socialism, the same socialism that they don't tell their little members at the bottom about. It's you'll toe the line, you'll do what you're told, or else that's it. And Bernard Shaw said it. You have to come to us and tell us why we should let you live and stay alive. That's what socialism is. This is an organised authoritarian system. It's not to help the working class, if there's any working class left. They're all left. They're all getting paid to sit at home right now, temporarily, mind you. They won't keep this up forever. But I did hear about, I read about, just casually, you're reading through some articles, and one was about this odd thing with the military boys, some of the military boys, the generals, against Trump. It's interesting. I'm not involved in politics, really I'm not. But it's rather evident that big things are happening when the generals won't back up the supposed commander-in-chief, right? And make public statements which really foment overthrow. That's when they make it public. Any disagreements they would have as gentlemen, as they say at that level, should always be done behind closed doors, and they can voice their disagreements and leave their job or whatever it happens to be. But when they actually stand up against their president, then you're looking for who are they going to replace it with? They'll say, who are they going to replace it with? Who do you think they're going to replace it with? Why would your generals, you better stop and think it, why would the generals, the way it's portrayed in its simplicity, right, be really pushing for what would become a totalitarian internationalist system to replace Trump, which is really a form of communism on behalf of the wealthy elite, as I've been talking about all night here. And it suits them at the top to have a form of communism, because in a communist societies, centralized systems run everything. And that's what Justin Trudeau talked about. He admired China dealing with COVID because they didn't have to bother going through democracy and persuading the people to go along. They just told them to go along, and they did it. So it's more efficient. Well, when your generals are pretty well advocating the same thing for different reasons, you have to say, wait a minute here, and one of them, the generals, had been asked what he thought of Mattis, and he is a good man, etc., and honourable man, yada yada yada. They're talking to General Kelly, John Kelly, and he said, yeah, he's a good man, and then asked him if he thought much the same of what Mattis had been complaining about. He says, well, yes, I suppose so, right? And I thought, why would the generals be going this far at this time? Well, it's not hard to find. I mentioned before how all generals, not just in the US, if it's the career generals or soldiers, they get recruited for the military-industrial complex, especially the retired ones and semi-retired ones. Some of them are semi-retired and still getting payments from the military-industrial corporations. And so I looked into Mr. Kelly, and I'm sure he really is looked up to by soldiers who have served under him and so on in different places. I would think so. But here you are. I mean, you look into it, and this is where it got me on this strange roundabout track here, and I'll go into it now. It's kind of important. I had Homeland Security nominee General John Kelly failed to disclose position at lobbying firm on ethics disclosure. And it says, this is from 2017. So John F. Kelly, the retired Marine Corps general nominated by Donald Trump to be Secretary of Homeland Security, did not disclose his position as a vice chairman at a lobbying firm called the Spectrum Group on his federal ethics forms made public this week. So the failure to disclose the position may run afoul of federal law requiring Senate-confirmed nominees to reveal potential conflicts of interest to the lawmakers and the public. He came on as a vice chairman at the end of last year, said Esther Lofgren, vice president of the Spectrum Group, when he reached for comment. Right? I've read elsewhere too in other articles that John F. Kelly was a vice chairman. So I don't know where this one is. Who knows? Maybe it came before or after. But it says The Intercept, this is the paper, could not reach Kelly by phone, and he did not return email requesting clarification over the issue. Now, you have to really look into who on earth or what on earth is this particular group, the Spectrum Group. And it's awfully interesting. One of many, I'm sure, don't forget the military-industrial complex is massive. And CIA guys are recruited into it, if not directly, and actually still stay in the CIA, and people from the Pentagon and top generals and admirals and all the rest of it. That's what you use, because they can get things done on behalf of corporations. They can get direct meetings with politicians that are put in charge of different divisions of government. All countries do the same thing. And it's very lucrative. I mentioned last week or the week before, I said, some of these massive contracts for the military-industrial groups, if you lobby for them, you may get a few $1 million, quite a few $1 million on each contract. It's just big money. Yeah. But they're supposed to be out of the military by then. They're not supposed to be taking a paycheck from the military or an official position and at the same time working for the private company. Yeah. This is a Spectrum Group, is a completely separate company, according to Cassie Desolik, executive assistant at DC Capital Partners Business. Registration records show that the two firms are distinct entities. They're not remotely in the same line of business as DC Capital Partners, which seems to be almost related to it, which Kelly listed focuses on equity investments in middle market companies that provide differentiated and innovative service. innovative service. The Spectrum Group, which Kelly did not list, specialised in lobbying and government affairs, but it's much bigger than that. You know? And I'm going to get into that as time goes on here. Before I do, by the way, I'll just touch again on the New Mobility Coalition by the World Economic Forum. And they're praising again this. They dragged out that stuff they did from Holland years ago. Oh, look at all the bicycles in Amsterdam. It's wonderful and healthy, and it doesn't produce the carbon. They said, although you're breathing a lot of CO2 out, the more you pedal, that's got nothing to do with it. But the fact that this is what they want you all to do: go bicycling again. Same old stuff, elimination of cars. But that's the Global New Mobility Coalition. Huh? Shaping the Future of Mobility platform. There you go. Isn't that wonderful? The same group again, your Oberführers are going to be in charge of can you move and travel or not move and travel, yada, 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 yada. I'm telling you. And do away with the private cars. Agenda 21 again. Now back to again the Spectrum Group, right? Now let's look at this particular group, Spectrum Group. One of their areas is biomedicine. Now you're dealing with a military-industrial complex outfit here, big time. They're involved in so much to do with, again, military-industrial complex. For the military mainly, and anything to do with the military. But biomedicine, this whole idea with the bio labs, for instance, is to do with biomedicine. That's what they say they're up there. That's what they're for, right? Well, want to make stuff, vaccines and stuff, and yada, 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 and alter, but with gain of function things to be more potent and deadly. And of course, that's why the military often uses them as covers for getting to the same position. It's for the good of all. By anticipating what nature would do in a few hundred years, we just speed up the process and make something which is pretty passive and harmless pretty deadly. This is what gain of function does. This is no exaggeration. This is what they do. Yeah. So here you find a link within the Spectrum Group to do with it. And it all started again with John Kelly. Just because I wanted to know why he was not on board with Trump and certain things, and he was backing up Mattis. And it could be completely different. It could be something else altogether. But then you find he's been compromised before with a military-industrial corporation he's been worked for. So here you have what's about from Sin BioWatch, it's called. And again, the same characters involved, right? Then what's the military, apart from killing folk, what's the military really interested with genetic modification and engineering and so on of bacteriums and viruses and all that? Sin BioWatch talks about the next generation genetic engineering. And it also mentions that the Gates Foundation paid $1.6 million to influence UN expert process. In other words, to get good comebacks and follow-ups and write-ups, etc., for some thereafter. So the Gene Drive file, awfully important, disclosed email, revealed military as top funder of dangerous new genetic manipulation technique. And Gene Drive actually is the ability to alter a life form by altering its genes, knowing that it's going to spread through all of its own kind's genes. And they'd used it to try to destroy, for instance, healthy males and mice that would eventually spread through a population in a controlled environment. So you can kill off a whole species of things by altering the genes of just a few initially, you see. It's a tremendous weapon, isn't it? So you can do it with mice, you can do it with people, or you can do it with subgroups of people. Like, we're all in subgroups. They've all put us in groups, this, that, the other, you know. And gene types in the Human Genome Project, that's part of the purpose of it in the first place. But It says over 1,200 emails released under an open records request reveal the US military is now the top funder and influencer behind a controversial genetic extinction technology. That's what it is. It's an extinction known as gene drives, pumping $100 million into the field. The trove of emails obtained via open records requests shed light on $1.6 million UN gene drive advocacy operation paid for by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So emerging ag is for agriculture too. You can do it in anything a life form, including crops and so on, and mammals as well. But emerging ag, a private PR firm paid by the Gates Foundation, were behind the scenes to stack key UN advisory processes with gene drive friendly scientists. That's standard stuff with all these characters, and has recruited ostensibly independent academics and public officials into a private collaboration to counteract proposed regulations and to resist calls by scientists and conservationists for an international moratorium. Some of those recruited entered into the UN discussions without divulging their conflicts of interest or the role that paid political consultants played in shaping their inputs. So, these files, which are dubbed the gene drive files, additionally cast a spotlight on the central role of the shadowy U.S. Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, as a key funder now accelerating gene drive development. For example, DARPA is now revealed as a major financier backer of efforts to develop gene drive mammals, such as mice, that are led by U.S. scientists and environmental NGO. That's for we're just environmentalists, So it says, although DARPA has no biodiversity conservation mission, raising questions about the defense agency's intent. These revelations come in the heels of a public warning issued by a leading gene drive researcher, Dr. Kevin Esvelt, that recurrent gene drives are too powerful to be used in conservation. Gene drives are a powerful and dangerous new technology and potential biological weapons that could have disastrous impacts on peace, food security and environment, especially if misused, said Jim Thomas of ETC Group. The fact that gene drive development is now being primarily funded and structured by the US military raises alarming questions about this entire field. No kidding, eh? No kidding. It says, gene drives could have profound global impacts, and these emails reveal a secretive attempt to game the system by gene drive proponents aiming to minimize essential regulations and oversight. In other words, do away with them, get around them, said Dana Perls of Friends of the Earth. And the Friends of the Earth, generally, some of the quotes from the top leaders of them, they're quite happy if the Earth depopulated. So there's no good guys anywhere. We need more transparency about who's influencing critical decisions about the future of global ecosystems, people, livelihoods, or our food system. In response to the news, the integrity of technical processes under Convention on Biological Diversity, interesting too, the Convention on Biological Diversity, if you may wonder what all that was about, may have been compromised. Civil society groups will urgently raise the need for better disclosure of interest within a framework for addressing conflict of interest at the CBD, said Lim Lai Ching of the Third World Network. Mosquitoes containing gene drives are being proposed for malaria control of Africa. While claiming potential health benefits, any application of such powerful technologies should be subject to the highest standards of transparency and disclosure. Sadly, this doesn't appear to be the case. Releasing risky GM organisms into the environments of these African countries with mosquitoes is outrageous and deeply worrying, said Miriam Mayet, Executive Director of the African Centre for Biodiversity. Don't forget, a lot of folk are getting terrible reactions to modified mosquitoes when they bite you. You can go into anaphylactic shock with these damn things. Some of them now that are modified, genetically modified. Well, we're here to help you. Anyway, it says the U.S. Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, is reported to have given approximately $100 million for gene drive research, $35 million more than previously reported. And it says, if confirmed, DARPA appears to be the largest single funder of gene drive research on the planet. An emerging ag, privately held public relations firm, received over $1.6 million from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to work on gene drive topics and to focus on exerting influence on the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, the key body for gene drive governance. So it's quite interesting what's going on with all this, but this is just the start of it. And then you get into this is an example. This is a good example right now. Genetic Engineering and Society Center, it's called, right? And genetically modified mosquitoes could be released in Florida and Texas beginning this summer. This is this June the 3rd, 2020. Silver bullet or jumping the gun. On May 2020, the company Oxitec, a big company, one of these groups, Oxitec received an experimental use permit from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. They're all the big gang at the top, FDA and U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. They're all connected. Food and Drug Administration, it's all the same group. To release millions of GM mosquitoes labeled as Oxitec OX5034 every week over the next 2 years in Florida and Texas. Females of this mosquito species transmit dengue, chikungunya, and yellow fever and Zika viruses. Isn't that wonderful? When these lab-bred GM males are released and mate with wild females, why can't they get a decent, homely kind of character, that wild females? But there you go. Their female offspring die. Continue a large-scale release of these OX5034 GM males could eventually cause the temporary collapse of a wild population. However, as vector biologists, geneticists, policy experts, bioethicists, we are concerned that current government oversight and scientific evaluation of GM mosquitoes do not ensure the responsible deployment. And it says, coral reefs that can withstand rising sea temperatures, American chestnut trees that can survive blight, and mosquitoes that can't spread disease are examples of how genetic engineering may transform the natural world. But they're doing genetic decoding and gene editing. It turns things on and off. You can do it in your brain too, by the way, and your whole body. You can turn any organ on and off with epigenetics. They can do this with gene editing emerge, and with speed and enthusiasm, the ecological systems they could alter remain enormously complex and understudied. But don't you believe it? They know what they're doing here. And it says, for the mosquitoes, they hope to yield inviable offspring or make them unsuitable for disease transmission. Right? Make them sterile. I can remember reading articles years ago when the Chinese are way ahead, with the people in China of what their governments have done in the past to do with sterilization and one child per family policies and things like that. And I can remember when they were going on, there was a hullabaloo, and the folk in the West were saying, what's the problem with them? And it was to do with eggs, where the chickens had been fed with, was it cottonseed or something? But it's a seed that literally produces sterility in males. And they were feeding the chickens with it on purpose, for that, maybe that purpose. But the people in China knew that. The ordinary folk knew that in China. And they're ahead of us as to what the governments will and have done in the past. And so they're on the watch for it. But we're so simple and stupid, aren't we? We're so used to being pampered. We're taking such great public relations. They're always there to help you, you see. They always do things to help you and to save you and for your benefit without you even have to even waste time knowing about it or waste time finding out what they're doing. Leave it to them. You trust them so much. You know that they're there to help you. Boy, I tell you, we're the easiest folk to manage. It's just astonishing. Anyway, they go into the different organisms that receive more attention for genetic modification than mosquitoes to yield inviable offspring or make them unsuitable for disease transmission. It says, although the EPA approved the permit for Oxitec, state approval is still required. a previously planned release in the Florida Keys of an earlier version of Oxitec's GM mosquitoes, OX513, was withdrawn in 2016 after a referendum indicated significant opposition from local residents. Oxitec has field trialed other GM mosquitoes in Brazil, Cayman Islands, Malaysia, and Panama. And so this goes on about trying to reassess the risks, etc., etc. It's just but these generals, as I say too, I'm not saying that Kelly was directly involved in biowarfare here, but there's no doubt about it. He worked for a company that's definitely a military-industrial complex, and that's what military-industrial complex are. Ways of killing folk or sterilizing for long-term plans, remember. This is not a new thing. I hope you understand that. The declassified governmental data from biowarfare companies working with governments during World War II and afterwards go into that whole scenario of how do you bring down, if you got a population that's going to be at war with you forever, or you're occupying a country and they're going to, every generation, they're going to grow more young children, more young boys to fight you. What do you do? Well, you've got to eliminate them some. How do you do that? Well, sterilization. There's many ways to get rid of young, even radicalize them more, to make them take more risks, and then supply them with leaders, and they become almost a kamikaze squad, and not bring down their population quickly, etc., etc. Or you can put stuff in their food, or you can literally sterilize them chemically through other means too, which I'm completely unaware of, you see. That's long-term planning. That's what you do with long-term planning with the military. And every military academy teaches that kind of stuff in this day and age. So yeah, it's not unthinkable at all why DARPA's involved to help you, in biomedicine, etc., and how to gene edit and turn switches on and off and all that kind of stuff. Don't forget too, you can turn switches on and off. That's how you sterilize people, and things just stop working in your body hormonal wise and blah 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 blah. It's quite easy to do. But we're living in a happy, wonderful world where they keep telling you they're here to help you. You know that. So this is a paranoid, suspicious conspiracy stuff, obviously. Now you can go into the next step of what are gene drives, right? And it's an experimental genetic engineering technology intended to aggressively spread a specific bioengineered trait among a species or population in nature. They're talking about crops and so on, or animals. Normally a genetically modified organism released to the wild would pass on to its bioengineered traits, such as herbicide resistance, to only about half of its offspring. Gene drives are designed so that bioengineered traits will be passed on to all or most offspring, even though they are likely to be 100% effective. If a gene drive were to be successful, the chosen genetically engineered traits would spread and become dominant in wild populations over a few generations of the species. A successful gene drive could intentionally or accidentally alter a species or crash it to extinction. So far, these artificial gene drives are developed using a new gene editing system known as CRISPR-Cas9. Then they go into what they could be used for, remove weeds, blah, 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 yada, 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 right? But then you go into the next part, how quickly are gene drives being developed? The first working CRISPR gene drive was reported in 2014. Since then, that's reported, right? Since then, hundreds of millions of dollars of private, philanthropic and military funds, like the philanthropies, you see, and military funds, let's underline that, have been directed into accelerating gene drive development, while some developers estimate that they're at least a decade away from being ready for an environmental release of gene drives. Sure they will. Our proponents are proposing field trial release of gene drive organisms as early as 2020. So far, gene drives have been put into mice, fruit flies, mosquitoes, yeast, and nematodes. Interesting too, eh? They've modified yeasts and fungi. It's just and we're getting all these strange fungus diseases. That's just coincidence, though. The temptations of gene drives, it says. Some policymakers may be drawn to gene drives since they seem to propose a simple silver bullet solution to complex problems. Technicians and corporations may be thrilled by the apparent technical power gene drives offering potential for increasing profit. With technical application may be marketed with ambitious claims as ready-made solutions. Failed experiments with such technological solutions in the past have demonstrated the need for precautionary approaches and deeper research into biological impacts. I know in the States, in some parts of Pennsylvania, they had problems with some kind of fungus overtaking farmers' fields because of some stuff that was sprayed by planes over them. And now this kind of strange fungus is overtaking other fields that weren't sprayed. It just keeps going. And so this is the kind of thing that can happen when you modify anything. But they're modifying insects too, right? And some they call it safe genes and insect allies, they call it. But don't forget that certain things can then start modifying you. They used to say years ago, it was a slogan, brought up by big PR companies, no doubt, but it was, you are what you eat, you know. And to an extent, it's awfully true, especially since you're not eating great stuff these days, when you're growing vegetables in the same soil over and over without a break, and there's no fallow period at all. So adding just chemicals to it doesn't make up all the stuff that your body really needs. It might give you a big plant or a big vegetable, but it doesn't mean it's full of nutrition, as you know. However, now you've got these particular invasive kind of gene drive systems, and they say that too. If one spreads in the wild, you know, a gene that they've introduced in a wild species, the gene drive organism will be subject to mutation and evolutionary pressures, as will the wild species in attempts to resist the invading gene drive. One way or another, the gene drive may fail to work, or the arising mutations may persist and spread through a population. Yeah, and that's so anyway, that's just that part. But what it made me think of was, here's your military and here's the top generals, and I wonder how many of them are involved and on the take. A lot of them are retired, remember, and they're allowed to be involved in all of this kind of stuff, and they always get approached to be on the boards of them because big money if they lobby for them, for these companies. It does make you wonder, especially when the military is so involved with all of it, and then you get Bill Gates as well, and then you get also the vaccines that Gates and all the rest of them are promoting, and Fauci, that literally are different kinds of vaccine that's going to alter the genetic makeup in the linings of your lungs, perhaps, and receptor sites in your lungs, modify them. So a different kind of vaccine from the old kind, where they took viruses and either killed them or made them less virile, so they wouldn't really spread or mutate in your body and multiply. And they put them into you in the hope that your body would detect them and then form antibodies against them, because they're weakened cells. Well, this is a different type of thing altogether. It's literally going to alter the makeup of your cells for the receptor sites. This is the big danger. Where does it stop? Will it stop there? They don't know. Oh, we're rushing it through and we've no option. Oh, it's to save the planet. Oh, come off it. Get off it. Come on. This is a big agenda here. What else will it do to you, I wonder? Huh? What else will it do to you? Think about it. You already had the reports coming out that COVID itself, this oddball COVID idea, 19, was causing sterility in some males in China. Because it not only affects the receptor sites, they see two receptor sites in the lungs, but it also would affect certain epithelial tissue, or epithelial-like tissue, like the kind inside the heart, you know, but also the testes. This is what they're saying. And of course, in the intestine, we'll all start to hibernate perhaps and live there. Well, so will the vaccines. They found that with other vaccines before. They can tell with certain vaccines they end up in some children's gut. Because they're specifically, they're detectable, since a lot of them they're modified to viruses, you see. Well, this thing, this COVID supposedly can go into something similar, which would mean that even if they gave you the other type of old type fashioned kind of vaccination for it, by using weakened cells or virus cells and put them into your body. How would that make your body produce? Because that kind was supposed to make your own body produces antibodies, which it would do anyway. Why would it make it would do any better than acquiring the immune system yourself? See, it makes no sense what they're doing. There's something stinks behind it all. If your body can make its own antibodies against COVID, and they're admitting that, why would their vaccination, and I'm talking the genetically modified type of vaccinate, why would that be any better if its whole intent is to stimulate your body to make antibodies against it anyway? When your body can make antibodies against it, why not just let it happen? It makes no sense at all. There's something else, something stinks behind it. But I know that they definitely want to bring out this 2 or 3 part vaccination series system that they're going to give you. And it's going to be using something, it's not even going to bother using the virus, it's going to literally modify you. And I really think you're going to get a terrible reaction to it if you come up against a particular virus down the road. This is what you're supposed to test over years before you give it to the public. And it's supposed that, well, we don't have time to do that this time. We don't have time. Well, really, when human life's at stake here, I think it's all the time in the world here. Will you? And why should you trust these characters that have cried wolf for so long? Right down from the shutting down the economy, when they admitted they wanted a complete reset a few years ago, and the same organisation at the top's using it all again, under the excuse of COVID. A lockdown, sustainability, the whole thing. Why would you trust them on anything, folks? Think about that. Why would you? And once again, folks, remember, you can buy the books and discs at cuttingthroughthematrix.com. You can donate to me, and you know how to do it if you bother, because I've got a whole bunch of sites to keep going, and I'd like to keep put out information as we go through all this stuff. I don't have any axe to grind. I don't have any political parties. I gave up on that joke a long time ago, and I just give you information of what's really happening for your own good, and maybe you can help yourself by knowing. A lot of folk don't want to know truth. They can't handle truth. But other folk really crave it. They want to know what's behind things. It gives them a satisfaction by really understanding the big picture, as opposed to the media, oh, be terrified of this now, or look at this now. No, you understand the big picture, and you realize this is a continuation of an agenda, an old agenda, by those at the top. And we truly are, we're kept like children, just like the movie, as I've said before. That movie called The Island, with the clones in it. Ewan McGregor. Very naive, for nefarious purposes, really at the top. They don't have your best interests in mind, especially when it comes to this word sustainability, folks. And with eugenics and sustainability, and believe you me, the left wing, where that's one of their main thing was eugenics. They really, for folk who don't know that, the thing is, oh, it's all these right wing. No. Socialism brought eugenics in. You talk about Adolf Hitler was a socialist, remember? And the socialists really believed in a scientifically run society by scientists and experts. That's what the Soviet Union was supposed to be, run by experts, professionals, and so on. That's what it is, folks. You keep things in their proper perspective, and you can see why the elite like socialism. It works better for them, like Justin Trudeau. You can get all things done. You don't have to bother with democracy and convincing folk. You can just tell them what to do and they'll do it. And that's what the big elite want, naturally. So remember, buy the books and discs, cuttingthroughthematrix.com. Make a list of all my sites, and you can see how to send a few bucks my way and keep me ticking over. And before I go too, I want to mention two or three other topics maybe. Now we're on to eugenics and so on. The University College London renames 2 lecture theatres in a building honouring Victoria, or Victorian, not Queen Victoria, eugenicists Carol Pearson and Frances Galton. And then they go through it too, problematic history, oh my goodness, and the university said Friday the Galton Lecture Theatre been renamed Lecture Theatre 115. That's very socialistic, yeah, that's better. The Pearson Lecture Theatre changed to Lecture Theatre G22, and the Pearson building to the northwest wing. That's very communist Soviet drabby, isn't it really? Victorian scientist Francis Galton coined the term eugenics and endowed UCL with his personal collection and archive, along with a bequest for the country's first professional chair of eugenics, of which Carol Pearson was the first holder, the university said. But it's just astonishing. The left-wingers, too, who praise scientists, experts, is that right? Think about it. Because Tesla, the dream, the hero of technocrats, the technocracy movement, and some of them involved and descended from it, Tesla, right? Where you would, Tesla believed in energy again and fitted right into the whole program, really, of a world run by energy credits and units. Tesla was a eugenicist. Have you read his different papers on eugenics and the folk, what should be done to them and done away with and all the rest of it too, for efficiency's sake. See, left wing is about efficiency. I hope you understand that. But so is right wing, because there's only one body of the bird behind the shield, and it runs both sides, left and right wing. Nothing changes, folks. Same group. But yeah, Tesla's okay. He's a wonder. He's a genius, you know. Well, where have you heard that rubbish before? Eh? Where have you heard that rubbish before? The man worked for the military-industrial complex. He created stuff, weapons. He said we could kill, maybe wipe out whole towns and cities using high frequencies and standing waves like we now have for the HARP technologies. But yeah, I mean, he was all for that kind of stuff, and but he also believed in superior types and inferior types. And he didn't believe inferior types should be allowed to breed or even exist. Hope you understand that. Of course, they made excuses for him too. Well, you know, he had these genius problems, you know, like maybe slightly autistic or something. It's hard to tell, but so they're always making excuses for the right people. You understand, you know, his electric system, and a car was named after him. It's quite something. But yeah, very selective. Just like they're very selective in who they protest, or depends whose heads are getting chopped off across the planet. If they're going to say anything at all, which generally is nothing. The leaders, I keep telling you, the leaders are chosen for you. That's why they're so selective and they're so silent at times. Absolutely. You know, it's rather obvious. But the followers never figure that out, unfortunately. They don't. They get carried away with it all. We're in the women team. It's our revolution now, you know. We're going to have utopia, you know, we're working for a better tomorrow. Yeah. For the common good. That's how it works out, isn't it? But they never figure this out when it's all happening. Also, you have the cyber attacks, and they're claiming China is behind it. Who knows? Australia's getting hacked, apparently, because they're an ally of the US, and the US is saber-rattling, getting ready for Iran and China again. You need an enemy, naturally, if you want to have a military at all. At least that's the belief of it all. I don't think they really do. I think if you're well prepared against any enemy and you're trained consistently, then you're all ready to cope with it very quickly if you have to. However, the US has been the policeman of the world for a long time, but it's also very lucrative for those in the military-industrial complex that can take resources, including the oil fields in the north of Syria, as they have never let them get back into Syrian hands. It's not called theft, though, or spoils of war even. It's just but taking care of it, you know, and just making sure it's all right. Yep, that's all right. Looks all right to me. And yeah, I'll also put up a link too to since we mentioned Nikola Tesla, and again association to the car, you know, word association. Again, a comedian who went up about an electronic car. How he looked good, and you know, to fit the image, you see, you have to do good for sustainability and clean air and all that kind of stuff. He says, and actually do nothing. Just look good, look the part, but really do nothing to help the environment or help anything else. It's a bit of a comedy on it. It's a good parody. And I think he starts off with it. Well, this car's worth $160,000, and because they must always show you how expensive and tell you how expensive it is as part of the status symbol of being a good environmentalist in this day and age, you know, for those that can afford it. And you can guarantee the folk that can afford it are not eating the poisoned food that you are. But that's how things really are. Eh? We live in an amazing time. of incredible mind management. It's all perception management. Everywhere you look is perception. Don't see it this way or think that. No, try and look at it this way instead. And that's how everything's supposed to be until everything's just psychotic. If you believe them and do what they say, everything would be psychotic, you understand, eh? Wouldn't it? Wouldn't it really? But that's where we are today. And we're already fed up with coronavirus. I won't even bother. I was going to put the World Health Organization, the most recent stats on it, And you get fed up with the nonsense and graphs and rubbish and they're fake. Everything's fake. To me, everything's fake. And we've been through it all before with a political virus that can disappear when the right kind of protests are taking place. And no one gets in trouble for it at all. And then it's immediately resurrected as you've all got to get locked down as soon as the protests are dying off. It's just astonishing times we live in, honestly, isn't it? It really is. It really is. Don't you realize if it's that deadly and the whole economy across the planet has to crash to save us, why would they not be going after folk who break the... If it's that deadly, why would you be stopping? Why would you literally stop it and then start it again? Because of politics. Come on. Something's either deadly or it's not deadly. And if folk literally are breaking it all, it's like this deadly, deadly disease and going to spread it to everybody else and kill folk, well, that's pretty well negligent or manslaughter at the very least on their... So why aren't they all getting dealt with? Well, it's not, everyone's politicized for other reasons. There's no reality to anything we're being told these days, obviously. Don't wear a mask, wear a mask. It's folk with no symptoms are spreading it, or the WHO says now, folk with no symptoms probably aren't spreading it at all. Forget it, folks. Forget it. It's a big agenda. Sustainability, the World Economic Forum, a massive organization, and it's got bureaucracies and levels of all bigger than some countries' bureaucracies, and they train folk for the whole planet, and they're already training their future child proteges. They'll unroll in a few years now when the other ones are getting a bit older. They'll bring a few other ones out that will parrot the same stuff. Because they've done it before, you see. Before now. Anyway, for myself, Alan Waterman to your Canada, remember, donate to me. Send me a few bucks. cuttingthroughmatrix.com. It's good night. And may your God or your gods go with you. And keep your sanity.